A convoy of black SUVs rolled through a frozen Chicago street like predators circling prey. Inside the lead vehicle sat Luca Voss, crime king, feared across the Midwest, untouchable. He was returning to his old neighborhood for one last deal before marrying into power. Then he saw her, a ghost from 7 years ago dragging a rusted scrap cart through the snow. His ex-wife. The woman he believed had destroyed him, and behind her, two boys with eyes the exact shade of steel gray as his own. In that instant, everything Luca thought he knew shattered. Were those his sons? If you want to see how a mafia king's world collapses in a single glance, and whether redemption is even possible when you've abandoned everything that mattered, stay until the end. Hit that like button and comment your city so I can see how far this story travels. Comment. The wind off Lake Michigan didn't just blow, it cut. It sliced through layers of fabric, found every gap in cheap coats, and reminded the people of South Chicago that winter here wasn't a season, it was a sentence. The kind of cold that made bones ache and breath freeze mid-exhale, turning the air itself into tiny daggers of ice. Mara Quinn had stopped noticing the cold 3 years ago. Not because she'd grown immune to it, nobody became immune to this kind of brutal chill, but because there were worse things to feel than frozen fingers and numb toes. Hunger, for instance. The gnawing kind that made her sons' faces look too thin, their eyes too large. The fear that came every month when rent was due, and the numbers in her bank account looked more like a cruel joke than actual money. She pulled the rusted scrap cart behind her, the wheels grinding against patches of ice and dirty snow that the plows had shoved to the curb weeks ago and forgotten. The cart had been her lifeline for 2 years now, filled with aluminum cans, copper wire, broken appliances she'd stripped for parts. Anything that could be sold by weight at Eddie's salvage yard for enough cash to keep the lights on one more week. "Mom, I'm tired." Nolan's voice was small, almost swallowed by the wind. Mara didn't turn around. If she looked at him, saw his pale face, the way he was struggling to keep up, she'd stop. And if she stopped, she'd cry. And if she started crying out here in the middle of Harrison Street, she wasn't sure she'd be able to start moving again. "I know, baby, just 2 more blocks." "You said that 3 blocks ago," Jace muttered from behind her. Unlike his twin brother, Jace's voice carried an edge that made him sound older than 6. Harder. Like he'd already figured out that the world didn't care if you were tired or cold or scared, so complaining about it was pointless. It broke Mara's heart every time she heard it, that tone that no child should have mastered yet. "Well, now it's true," she said, forcing brightness into her voice that she absolutely did not feel. 2 more blocks and we'll be home. I'll make hot chocolate." "We don't have any hot chocolate," Jace said flatly. "I've got 1 packet left. We'll share it." She heard Nolan's footsteps speed up slightly at that. Her sweet boy, always so easy to encourage with the smallest promise. Jace remained silent, which meant he was calculating whether she was lying or not. He'd learned to do that too, to measure her words against reality and find them wanting. What kind of mother raised children who had to become accountants of her honesty? The cart's front wheel hit a pothole and nearly jerked out of her grip. Mara's shoulder screamed in protest. She'd pulled something in it last week and hadn't had the time or money to deal with it properly. She gritted her teeth, adjusted her grip, and kept walking. The street was mostly empty at this hour. 4:30 in the afternoon in February meant the sun was already starting to think about setting, casting everything in that particular gray light that made Chicago look like a city photographed in black and white. A few people hurried past with their heads down, everyone focused on getting home, getting warm, getting through another day. Nobody looked at her. Mara had learned that being poor made you invisible. People's eyes would slide right past you like you were part of the urban furniture, just another piece of the city's broken infrastructure that everyone had learned to step around without really seeing. She preferred it that way. Being noticed meant questions. Questions meant having to explain why a 30-year-old woman was hauling scrap metal through the snow with 2 small boys trailing behind her like tiny soldiers. Questions meant pity, and pity was somehow worse than invisibility, because pity required her to acknowledge her own circumstances, to see herself through someone else's eyes. So she kept her head down and pulled the cart and counted blocks. 1 more after this one. Then she heard the engines, not the regular traffic sounds of the city, the rattle of old sedans and the rumble of delivery trucks. These were different, smooth, powerful, The kind of purr that came from machines that cost more than most people's houses. Mara's survival instincts, honed by years of navigating dangerous neighborhoods, made her glance back at her sons. "Stay close to the buildings," she said quietly. Jace immediately understood, moving toward the storefronts without question. Nolan followed his brother's lead, his eyes going wide and alert. The convoy appeared at the end of the block like a vision from a different world. 3 black SUVs, so pristine they looked like they'd been detailed that morning, rolled down Harrison Street in perfect formation. The windows were tinted so dark they seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Chrome accents caught the dying sunlight and threw it back in sharp glints that hurt to look at directly. Mara had seen vehicles like this before, of course. This was Chicago. This was her old neighborhood, the one she'd grown up in before everything went to hell. She knew what convoys like this meant: power, money, danger. The kind of people who traveled in vehicles like that didn't stop for red lights or parking tickets or the normal rules that governed everyone else's existence. They moved through the world with the certainty of people who'd never been told no in any meaningful way, or who'd made sure that anyone who said no learned to regret it. She should have looked away. Every instinct screamed at her to keep her eyes on the ground, to be invisible, to let the convoy pass like weather, something to be endured and then forgotten. But something made her look up. Maybe it was the way the lead SUV slowed as it approached her position. Maybe it was the prickle of awareness that crawled up her spine, the animal sense that she was being watched. Maybe it was just terrible timing, the universe's cosmic sense of humor deciding that this was the perfect moment to detonate a bomb she didn't even know had been buried in her past. The rear window of the lead vehicle was lowering. Mara's heart stopped. 7 years collapsed in an instant. The face in that window, older now, harder, with lines around the eyes that hadn't been there before, but unmistakable. Absolutely unmistakable. Luca Voss. The man she'd loved with the kind of desperate, all-consuming passion that only stupid 23-year-olds were capable of feeling. The man who'd promised her forever, and then disappeared like smoke when she'd needed him most. The man whose last words to her had been accusations of betrayal screamed through a closed door while she'd stood on the other side, 3 months pregnant and trying not to collapse. The man she'd taught herself to hate with the same intensity she'd once loved him because hate, at least, kept her standing when grief would have pulled her under. Their eyes met across 20 feet of frozen Chicago street. Mara watched recognition hit him like a physical blow. His expression, controlled, cold, the face of a man who'd spent years learning not to show weakness, cracked just enough for her to see the shock beneath it. She could practically hear his thoughts from here. It can't be. She's dead. She has to be dead. I looked for her and she was gone, and then his gaze shifted, moved past her, landed on the 2 boys pressed against the storefront wall. Jace and Nolan, with their dark hair and pale skin and eyes that were the exact shade of steel gray as the man staring at them from the window of a $100,000 SUV. Mara saw the moment Luca's brain made the connection, saw him do the math that any idiot could do. 7 years since they'd last seen each other. Twin boys who looked about 6 years old. Eyes that mirrored his own with such precision that genetics had basically signed a confession. His face went absolutely white. The convoy stopped. Everything stopped. Time seemed to freeze in that particular way it does when your past and present collide with enough force to reshape your entire understanding of the world. Mara's grip on the cart handle tightened until her knuckles went bloodless. Her breath came in short, sharp gasps that had nothing to do with the cold and everything to do with the panic rising in her chest like floodwater. Not now. Not like this. Not ever. The rear door of the SUV opened. Luca Voss stepped out onto Harrison Street like a king surveying conquered territory. He'd always moved with a particular kind of confidence, the certainty of someone who'd never had to question whether he belonged anywhere he chose to stand. But it had intensified over the years into something more dangerous. Authority radiated from him like heat, making the very air around him seem charged with potential violence. He'd filled out since she'd last seen him. His shoulders were broader under the charcoal gray coat that probably cost more than her trailer's annual lot rent. His jaw was harder, covered in deliberate stubble that made him look like he'd just stepped out of a cologne advertisement. The boy she'd loved had been replaced by a man who looked like he ate lesser men for breakfast. But his eyes hadn't changed. Still that particular shade of gray that shifted between steel and smoke depending on his mood. Still intense enough to make her feel like he could see straight through whatever defenses she tried to construct. Still capable of making her heart do stupid things she'd thought she'd trained out of it years ago. "Luca, darling, what are we stopping for?" A woman's voice floated from inside the SUV, cultured, annoyed, with the kind of vocal fry that came from expensive private schools and a lifetime of being catered to. A second figure emerged from the vehicle. The woman was stunning in that particular way that required a team of professionals and a significant budget. Sleek black hair pulled into a style so perfect it looked lacquered, skin like porcelain, makeup applied with surgical precision. A white coat that was absolutely not designed for actual Chicago winter, but for looking good while briefly stepping out of climate-controlled luxury. She linked her arm through Luca's with the possessive confidence of ownership and followed his gaze to Mara. Then her expression shifted from confusion to something uglier. "Oh," she said, her voice dripping with a disdain so pure it was almost impressive. "Is this some kind of charity case? Luca, we're already late for the venue meeting." Mara felt rage ignite in her chest, white-hot and immediate. She'd taken a lot over the years. She'd swallowed her pride, accepted her circumstances, learned to survive on scraps and determination. But she would not, absolutely would not, stand here and be looked at, like garbage, by some overpaid ornament in a white coat. "We're fine," Mara said, her voice coming out harder than she'd intended. "No charity needed. We were just leaving." She started to turn away, reaching for her sons with one hand while maintaining her grip on the cart with the other. "Wait." Luca's voice stopped her mid-step. It wasn't loud, it wasn't aggressive, but it carried the weight of absolute command, the kind of tone that made people obey without quite understanding why. Mara's body betrayed her by actually stopping. She hated herself for it. "Mara." He said her name like he was testing whether it was real. "Mara Quinn." "We have nothing to talk about," she said without turning around. "Those boys are none of your business. They have my eyes." The words hung into the frozen air like an accusation. Mara finally turned to face him fully, positioning herself between Luca and her sons in a stance that was pure protective instinct. Her chin came up in defiance, her eyes blazing with 7 years of accumulated fury. "You gave up any right to opinions about my children the day you threw me out of your life like I was trash. So take your fancy cars and your—" She gestured at the woman still clinging to Luca's arm. "Whatever she is, and get the hell out of my neighborhood." The woman's perfectly sculpted face twisted with outrage. "Excuse me? Do you have any idea who you're speaking to?" "Some guy who used to matter 7 years ago," Mara said coldly. "Now he's just traffic, and you're blocking my way home." She saw Luca flinch, actually flinch, at the words. Some small, petty part of her felt satisfied by it. Good. Let him hurt. Let him feel a fraction of what she'd felt when his father's men had physically blocked her from entering the Voss estate, when they told her that Luca wanted nothing to do with her or her lies, when she'd collapsed on the street outside those gates with her hand pressed to her stomach and prayed that the babies, were still alive. "Mom?" Nolan's voice was tiny, scared. "Can we go now?" The woman's attention snapped to the boys like a predator identifying prey. "Oh my," she said, her voice saccharine sweet, in a way that made Mara's skin crawl. "Aren't you two just adorable little things? Though you could use some proper clothing. That jacket looks like it came from a donation bin." Jace's expression went cold, that frightening blankness he'd learned to adopt when he was protecting himself from hurt. Something inside Mara snapped. "Listen to me very carefully," she said, her voice dropping to a register that she usually reserved for the genuinely dangerous people in her neighborhood, the ones you couldn't show weakness to or they'd destroy you. "You will not speak to my children. You will not look at my children. You will get back in your expensive car and you will leave. Now." The woman laughed, actually laughed, the sound sharp and cruel. "Or what? You'll hit me with your little cart?" She reached into her designer purse and pulled out a sleek wallet. "Here's what we're going to do instead. I'm going to give you some money, let's say $500, that's probably more than you see in a month. And you're going to take your unfortunate offspring and disappear, permanently. Whatever connection you think you have to my fiancé is ancient history. He's moved on, way up." She gestured to herself. And well, here." She pulled out a stack of bills and held them out like she was feeding a stray dog. Mara looked at the money, $500. That was groceries for 2 months. Heat for the trailer. Nolan's inhaler prescription with enough left over for Jace's glasses repair. Every practical cell in her body screamed at her to take it. Her pride, battered, scarred, but somehow still intact, told her exactly what she could do with that woman's money. Mara reached out. The woman's smile turned triumphant. Then Mara took the bills and threw them directly into the filthy snow at the woman's feet. "Keep your money," she said quietly. "We don't need it. And we definitely don't need to be paid off like we're some kind of problem to be solved. Come on, boys." She turned and grabbed the cart handle, her entire body shaking with adrenaline and fury and something that felt dangerously close to despair. "Mara, wait," Luca started. "Don't." She cut him off without looking back. "Don't you dare. You made your choice 7 years ago. You believed I betrayed you. You threw me away. And you know what? I survived it. I survived all of it. So you don't get to weight me now. You don't get to question me about my sons. You don't get anything from me except my back as I walk away." She started pulling the cart, her sons falling into step behind her. Jace looked back once, his gray eyes meeting Luca's in a moment of connection that made the older man actually stagger backward a step. Then the boy turned away and kept walking. Mara didn't stop. Not when she heard the woman's voice rising in anger behind her. Not when she heard Luca say something sharp in response. Not when she heard car doors slamming. She just pulled her cart and her boys forward, counting steps instead of blocks now, focusing on the simple mechanics of movement. Because if she let herself think about what had just happened, about the look on Luca's face when he'd seen the twins, about the questions that were going to come, about the entire structure of careful invisibility she'd built over 7 years potentially crumbling, she would shatter right here on Harrison Street. "Mom?" Nolan's voice was shaking. "Who was that man?" "Nobody important," Mara lied. "He had eyes like us," Jace said. Not a question, an observation delivered with the clinical precision of a prosecuting attorney presenting evidence. Mara's hands tightened on the cart until her injuries screamed in protest. "Drop it, Jace." "But I said drop it." The hardness in her voice made both boys fall silent. They walked the last block in heavy quiet, the only sounds the grinding of cartwheels and their footsteps crunching through frozen slush. The trailer park appeared ahead, a cluster of aging mobile homes that the city planners had shoved into the least desirable corner of the neighborhood and then promptly forgotten about. Home. Their trailer was fourth from the left in the second row, a faded blue single-wide that leaked heat in winter and turned into an oven in summer. The steps were rickety, the door stuck. The whole structure tilted slightly to the left like it was tired and thinking about lying down. But it was theirs. Mara had paid every cent of rent on time for 3 years. She'd patched the roof herself when it started leaking. She'd weatherproofed the windows with plastic sheeting and made it work. She parked the cart beside the trailer and fumbled for her keys with numb fingers. "Inside," she told the boys, "shoes off. Jace, start the space heater in your room. Nolan, check if there's still bread for toast." They obeyed without argument, which told her they understood something serious had just happened, even if they didn't fully comprehend what. Mara waited until the door closed behind them before she let herself lean against the trailer's cold metal siding and press her hands to her face. 7 years. 7 years of rebuilding herself from nothing. 7 years of learning to be enough for 2 boys who deserved so much more than she could give them. 7 years of carefully constructing a life that was small and hard and precarious but hers, something she controlled, something that couldn't be taken away by someone else's choices. And Luca Voss had walked back into it in the span of 5 minutes and threatened to burn it all down just by existing. Because she knew him, knew that look in his eyes when he'd seen the boys. He wasn't going to let this go. Inside the lead SUV, Luca Voss sat frozen as the convoy pulled away from the curb. His hands were shaking. Luca Voss, the man who'd negotiated with cartel representatives without breaking a sweat, who'd stared down federal prosecutors and smiled, who'd built an empire on the ability to remain cold and controlled in any circumstance, was shaking like a teenager who'd just seen his first dead body. "Well, that was certainly dramatic," Celeste said from beside him, her tone dripping with sarcasm. Though I have to say, darling, your taste in exes is absolutely tragic. Did you see that coat? I think I saw the same one in a Goodwill window last week. Luca didn't respond. Couldn't respond. His mind was replaying the last 5 minutes on an endless loop. Mara's face, older, harder, but still her. The way she'd looked at him with such pure hatred that it had felt like a physical blow. The boys with their thin frames and worn clothes and eyes that were mirrors of his own. 7 years ago. The timeline matched perfectly. The math was simple, brutal, undeniable. Luca? Celeste's voice took on an edge. Are you listening to me? We're supposed to be looking at the venue for the engagement party, and you're... What are you doing? He was pulling out his phone. Marcus, he said when his head of security answered, I need information. Mara Quinn. Last known address, employment history, everything. I want it within the hour. Understood, boss. And Marcus? This is priority 1. Drop everything else. He ended the call. Celeste was staring at him like he'd just announced he was joining a monastery. You cannot be serious, she said slowly. That woman, those children, you're not actually considering... They're mine. The words came out flat, certain. You don't know that. I know. He turned to look at her fully for the first time since they'd gotten back in the vehicle. I know, Celeste. Those boys are mine. So what? So what if they are? Celeste's voice rose in pitch, her cultivated composure cracking. That was 7 years ago. Ancient history, some failed relationship from before you became who you are now. You don't owe that woman anything. I owe those boys everything. The words surprised him as much as they clearly shocked her. But they were true. The moment he'd seen those 2 small figures pressed against the storefront wall, their eyes, his eyes, watching him with a mixture of fear and curiosity, something had shifted in his chest. Something fundamental had realigned, like tectonic plates moving beneath the surface of his carefully constructed world. Those were his sons. His. And they were dressed in second-hand clothes, following their mother as she dragged scrap metal through the snow to survive. While he sat in luxury vehicles and negotiated million-dollar deals, the rage that rose in him was so intense he had to physically restrain himself from putting his fist through the window. This is insane, Celeste said. We're supposed to be planning our future. The merger with my father's operations, the expansion into the eastern markets, that's what matters. Not some trailer trash ex-girlfriend and her... Finish that sentence and we're done. Luca's voice was quiet, deadly. Right now. This engagement, this relationship, everything. Finish that sentence and I will put you out of this car in the middle of the street. Celeste's mouth snapped shut. She'd never heard him use that tone with her before. Nobody had, really, except for people who ended up regretting it very shortly afterward. You're making a mistake, she said finally, her voice tight. Probably. Luca looked out the window at the passing city. But it's my mistake to make. The rest of the drive passed in frigid silence. When the convoy pulled up to the Voss estate, a sprawling compound in Lincoln Park that looked more like a fortress than a home, Luca was out of the vehicle before it fully stopped. Sir? His driver looked concerned. The venue appointment. Cancel it, Luca said over his shoulder. Cancel everything for the next week. He took the front steps 2 at a time and burst through the doors with enough force to make them bang against the walls. The house staff scattered at his approach. Smart people. He needed exactly one person right now, and that person was sitting in the study like he always was at this hour, reviewing reports, managing his empire, controlling every aspect of his world with the precision of a master puppeteer. Luca didn't knock. Victor Voss looked up from his desk as his son entered, his expression mildly curious. Luca, I thought you had an appointment with the Wynn girl this afternoon. We need to talk, Luca said, about Mara Quinn. Something flickered in Victor's eyes, too fast to identify, but definitely there. That's ancient history, son. Why bring up... Because I just saw her. Luca crossed the room and planted his hands on his father's desk, leaning forward until they were nearly eye to eye. I saw her on Harrison Street, dragging a scrap cart through the snow, with 2 6-year-old boys who have my eyes. Victor's expression didn't change. That was how Luca knew. If his father had been surprised, genuinely shocked by this information, he would have reacted. Victor Voss was a master of control, but even masters had tells when confronted with the genuinely unexpected. But there was nothing. No shock, no confusion, just a carefully blank expression that told Luca everything he needed to know. "You knew," Luca said softly. "You knew she was pregnant." "I knew she claimed to be pregnant," Victor corrected. "I knew she tried to use that claim to manipulate you into staying with her instead of focusing on your future. Your real future, not some romantic fantasy about running away with a girl who was clearly using you for access to our family's resources." The room temperature seemed to drop 20 degrees. "Tell me exactly what happened 7 years ago," Luca said, his voice deadly calm. "And I would strongly advise you not to lie to me right now." Victor leaned back in his chair, studying his son with the clinical interest of a scientist observing a particularly fascinating specimen. "She came to the house," he said finally, "after you'd left for the Singapore negotiations. Crying, hysterical, claiming she was pregnant and that you'd abandoned her, that you'd promised her marriage and then disappeared. And I handled it. I explained that you'd discovered her infidelity." "What infidelity?" Luca's voice cracked like a whip. "The photographs I'd shown you, the ones of her with Marcus Chen at that hotel." "Marcus works for us. He always has." "He did, until I paid him to take those photographs with her, to make it look like she'd betrayed you." Victor said it casually, like he was discussing the weather. "It was remarkably easy to arrange, a few drinks, some carefully edited footage, and you believed exactly what I needed you to believe." The words hung in the air like poison. Luca felt his world tilting. Why? Because she was a distraction. Victor stood, walking to the window that overlooked the estate grounds. "You were 23 years old, brilliant, capable of taking this organization to heights I could only dream of. And you were ready to throw it all away for a girl from the old neighborhood who worked in a coffee shop. A girl with no family, no connections, nothing to offer except romantic notions that would have destroyed your potential. So you destroyed her instead." "I saved you," Victor corrected. "I saved you from a catastrophic mistake that would have limited everything you could become. And look where you are now. Look at what you've built. The Voss name is feared and respected across 3 states. You've negotiated deals that lesser men couldn't even conceive of. You're engaged to Celeste Wynn, which will unite 2 of the most powerful families in the Midwest. You have everything. Except my sons." Luca's voice was barely a whisper. "Except 7 years with my children. Except Mara. Mara was weak. She would have made you weak." Luca turned to face his father fully. In that moment, he saw him clearly for perhaps the first time in his life. Not as the powerful patriarch who'd built an empire, not as the mentor who'd taught him everything about strategy and control, but as an old man who'd become so obsessed with power that he'd sacrificed every human connection on its altar and expected his son to do the same. "You're wrong," Luca said quietly. "She wasn't weak, she survived. She survived being abandoned while pregnant. She survived raising 2 children alone. She survived 7 years of poverty and hardship. That's not weakness, father. That's strength you've never had to develop because you've always had money and power to protect you from consequences." "This is emotional nonsense. Get out." Victor's eyebrows rose. "Excuse me? Get out of this house, now, tonight. Pack whatever you need and leave." "This is my house, Luca. I built, and I'm taking it, along with everything else. Consider this a hostile takeover." Luca's voice was ice. "You have 2 hours. After that, security will escort you out. Don't make them do it forcibly." For the first time in the conversation, Victor looked genuinely shocked. "You can't be serious. Over some woman? Some bastard children?" "Over my family," Luca corrected. "My sons, who you condemned to poverty because of your manipulation. So yes, father, I'm absolutely serious. Get out of my house." He turned and walked toward the door. "You'll regret this," Victor called after him, "when the winds pull their alliance, when the Eastern Territories reject your leadership because you chose trailer trash over power. You'll regret this decision." Luca paused in the doorway. "Maybe," he said, "but at least I'll regret my own choices instead of living with yours." He left his father standing in the study and climbed the stairs to his private office. His phone was already buzzing with a message from Marcus. "Found her. Address attached? Boss, you should know. The situation is worse than you think." Luca opened the attachment. Address: Harborview Mobile Home Park, Lot 24. Employment: none currently listed. Previous employment at 3 different cleaning services, all terminated. Income, disability payments, and scrap metal sales. Medical records: flagged. Multiple ER visits for malnutrition-related issues. Both children showing signs of chronic respiratory problems likely related to mold exposure. The words blurred as Luca read them. His sons, his children, were sick, living in conditions that were making them sick. While he'd been building empires and accumulating wealth and planning engagement parties with a woman he didn't even love. His phone buzzed again. Also found the witness you're going to want to talk to. Maribel Crane, 78, lives across from your old neighborhood. She was there 7 years ago. Says she has information. Luca was already moving. On. Maribel Crane's apartment was a 4th-floor walk-up in a building that had been old when Luca was a child. The elevator had never worked in his memory, and apparently still didn't, based on the out-of-order sign that looked like it had been there for decades. He climbed the stairs, his expensive shoes echoing in the concrete stairwell. The door to 4B was painted a cheerful yellow that seemed wildly out of place in the dingy hallway. Luca knocked. "It's open," a voice called from inside. "Come in, Mr. Voss. I've been expecting you." He pushed the door open and found himself in a small apartment that was cluttered but clean. Every surface was covered with photographs, plants, and the accumulated treasures of a long life. Maribel Crane sat in an armchair by the window, a blanket over her lap despite the overheated room. She was tiny, barely 5 feet tall even when she'd been young, Luca guessed, with silver hair and eyes that were sharp despite her age. "You look like your father," she said without preamble, "but you've got your mother's mouth. She was a kind woman, your mother, before this life broke her." Luca crossed the room and sat in the chair she gestured to. "You have information about Mara Quinn." "I have the truth about Mara Quinn," Maribel corrected. "Whether you want to hear it is another matter entirely." "Tell me." She studied him for a long moment, like she was weighing something important. Then she began to speak. 7 years ago, a girl showed up at the Voss estate gates, crying, pregnant, desperate. She'd been trying to call you for weeks, but someone had blocked her number. Your father's people stopped her at the gate, told her you wanted nothing to do with her, told her you knew about her betrayal, and considered her dead to you. Luca's hands clenched on the arms of the chair. She collapsed right there on the street. I was walking past. I used to walk every day back then, before my knees gave out, and I saw the whole thing. Called an ambulance, stayed with her at the hospital. Was she... She was barely keeping those babies alive, stress-induced complications. They thought she might lose them. Maribel's voice was gentle, but her words were devastating. She stayed in the hospital for 3 days. When she got out, she tried one more time to reach you. Your father's men stopped her again. One of them, big guy, scar on his face, told her that if she tried to contact the Voss family again, there would be consequences. That pregnant or not, they'd make sure she understood her place. Rage, pure incandescent rage, flooded through Luca's system. She left the city after that. I gave her what money I could, helped her get a bus ticket to Milwaukee. Figured she'd be safer away from here. Maribel leaned forward. She came back 3 years ago. I don't know why. I see her sometimes, dragging that cart around, those boys trailing behind her like little shadows. And I think about calling you, telling you the truth. But what good would it do? You'd become your father's son by then. Another powerful man who valued control over people. I'm not my father. Aren't you? She raised an eyebrow. You walked away from her based on manufactured evidence. You built an empire on fear and violence. You're about to marry a woman you don't love to consolidate power. How exactly are you different? The question hit him like a physical blow. I can change, he said. Can you? Or will you just throw money at the problem? Give Mara a check, set up your sons in some fancy school, and then go back to your empire building while congratulating yourself on being generous? What would you have me do? Maribel smiled, sad and knowing. That's not for me to say, Mr. Voss. But I'll tell you this. That girl has survived things that would have broken lesser people. She's raised 2 boys alone, in poverty, and somehow kept them kind. I see them sometimes, those twins. The hard one and the soft one. And they're good children despite everything. That's Mara's doing. That's her strength. She paused. So if you're going to walk back into her life, you better be damn sure you're doing it for the right reasons. Not guilt, not obligation, not to soothe your own conscience, because she doesn't need another man who makes promises he can't keep. She's survived those already. Luca stood. Thank you, Mrs. Crane. Don't thank me yet. You haven't done anything worth thanking. She settled back in her chair. But if you do, if you actually become a man worth those boys calling father, then maybe I'll accept your gratitude. He left her apartment with her words ringing in his ears. Outside, night had fully fallen. Luca stood on the street and looked toward the south side of the city, toward the trailer park where his sons were sleeping in conditions that were making them sick, with a mother who'd survived things she should never have had to survive. His phone buzzed. Celeste, we need to talk. This is ridiculous. Call me. He deleted the message. Then he called Marcus. I need you to arrange something, he said when his security chief answered. Tomorrow morning. And Marcus? This is going to get complicated. The blizzard warning came through on Mara's phone at 11 p.m., the sharp buzz cutting through the thin walls of the trailer like an alarm. She was still awake, sitting at the cramped kitchen table with a calculator and a stack of bills that refused to make sense no matter how many times she rearranged them. Rent, $650, due in 5 days. Electric, $180, already 2 weeks overdue. Nolan's inhaler prescription, $85. He'd need a refill by next week. Money from today's scrap haul, $43. The math didn't work. It never worked. But she kept doing it anyway, like somehow if she stared at the numbers long enough they'd rearrange themselves into something survivable. She glanced at the weather alert. Historic winter storm expected to hit Chicago area beginning 2 a.m. Blizzard conditions. Wind chills reaching -40. Residents advised to stay indoors. Power outages likely. Mara looked around the trailer. The space heater in the boys' room was already running on its highest setting, barely keeping their small space above 60 degrees. If the power went out, when the power went out, because it always went out in this park during heavy storms, they'd have maybe 4 hours before the cold became dangerous. She checked her emergency supplies. 3 blankets, 2 flashlights with questionable batteries, half a gallon of water, some granola bars that were probably expired. Not enough. Never enough. She heard movement from the boys' room, light footsteps that she immediately identified as Nolan's. He appeared in the doorway moments later, his thin frame wrapped in a blanket, his eyes sleepy. Can't sleep? Mara asked softly. He shook his head and padded over to her, climbing into her lap with the unconscious trust of a child who'd never learned to question whether his mother would catch him. At 6 years old, he was getting too big for this, all long limbs and sharp elbows. But Mara held him anyway. Bad dreams? She asked. No, just thinking. About what, baby? Nolan was quiet for a long moment. Then, that man today. The one with the eyes like us. Mara's entire body tensed. Jace said he was our dad, Nolan continued, his voice small. Is that true? The question landed like a punch to the solar plexus. Mara had known this conversation was coming. Had known it from the moment Luca Voss's convoy had rolled away and left her standing on Harrison Street with her carefully constructed lies crumbling around her feet. But knowing something was coming and being prepared for it were two very different things. What did Jace tell you? She asked carefully. That the man had our eyes and that you got really mad when the lady was mean to us, and that means something important happened. Nolan tilted his head up to look at her. Jace is good at figuring things out. Too good, Mara thought. Jace saw everything, processed everything, missed nothing. It was going to make him either a brilliant lawyer or a criminal mastermind someday, and she wasn't entirely sure which option scared her more. It's complicated, she said finally. That's what grown-ups say when they don't want to tell the truth. Mara couldn't help the small laugh that escaped. When did you get so smart? I've always been smart. You just don't notice because Jace talks more. Fair point. She shifted Nolan in her lap so she could see his face properly, those gray eyes that were absolutely, undeniably Luca's. No point denying it now. Yes, she said quietly. That man is your father. Nolan absorbed this information with the serious consideration he gave to everything important. Why doesn't he live with us? Because he didn't know about you. About either of you. Why not? Because when I found out I was pregnant with you and your brother, your father and I weren't together anymore. And when I tried to tell him, the people around him wouldn't let me. They thought I was lying. Were you lying? No, baby. Never. So why didn't he believe you? The question was innocent, guileless, and absolutely devastating. Because he was young and stupid and his father was a manipulative bastard who valued power over people, Mara thought. Because he loved me, but not enough to question the convenient lies he was fed. Because walking away was easier than fighting for the truth. But she couldn't say any of that to a 6-year-old. Sometimes people make mistakes, she said instead. Your father made a mistake, and I made a mistake by not trying harder to reach him. And now, here we are. Is he going to come back? I don't know. Do you want him to? Mara opened her mouth to say no, to tell her son that they were fine on their own, that they didn't need anyone, that the three of them were a complete family without any additions required. But the lie stuck in her throat, because the truth was complicated and messy and absolutely terrifying. Yes, she wanted Luca to come back. Not for her. She'd cauterized that wound years ago, or at least she'd thought she had, but for her sons. For Jace, who was too hard and too guarded and needed to see that not all men abandoned their responsibilities. For Nolan, who was too soft and too hopeful and needed his innocence protected for just a little while longer. But wanting something and being able to survive it were two different things. I want what's best for you and your brother, she said carefully, and I'm not sure yet what that is. Nolan seemed satisfied with this answer. He snuggled deeper into her embrace, his breathing evening out as exhaustion finally claimed him. Mara held him and watched the snow begin to fall outside the window. Lazy flakes at first, then faster, thicker, until the world beyond the glass disappeared into white static. The storm was coming. She just wasn't sure which one was going to hit first, the one made of ice and wind, or the one named Luca Voss. The power went out at 3:15 a.m. Mara jerked awake at the sudden silence, the absence of the space heater's mechanical hum, the darkness that was absolute and pressing. She'd moved Nolan back to his bed an hour ago and had been dozing fitfully at the kitchen table, too anxious to actually sleep. She grabbed one of the flashlights and flicked it on. The beam was weak, watery, but enough to navigate by. The trailer was already getting cold. Mara moved through the small space quickly, piling every blanket she owned onto the boys' beds. Jace stirred as she tucked another layer around him. Power's out, he mumbled, still half asleep. I know, baby. Try to stay under the covers, okay? Keep warm. She checked on Nolan next. He was still deeply asleep, his breathing slightly congested. Not unusual. He'd had respiratory issues since he was a baby, something about his lungs being slightly underdeveloped. The mold in the trailer didn't help, but she couldn't afford to move and she couldn't afford to fix it, so she just monitored him constantly and prayed his inhaler would be enough. Mara pressed her hand to his forehead. Warm. Not fever warm, not yet, but warmer than he should be. She grabbed the thermometer from the bathroom and took his temperature as gently as she could. 99.8 degrees. Borderline. Could be nothing. Could be the start of something. She'd keep an eye on it. Mara returned to the kitchen and pulled on every layer of clothing she owned, then wrapped herself in the one blanket she'd kept for herself and settled in to wait out the storm. Outside, the wind was screaming. By 6 a.m., Nolan's temperature had climbed to 101.3. By 8 a.m., it was 102.7 and he was struggling to breathe properly even with his inhaler. By 9 a.m., Mara was trying not to panic. She'd seen this before. Respiratory infections that turned dangerous fast, fevers that spiked and wouldn't break. The last time, 2 years ago, they'd ended up in the ER with Nolan on oxygen and a doctor telling her that one more hour and they might have been looking at permanent lung damage. She couldn't let that happen again. But the storm outside was biblical. Whiteout conditions, wind that could knock a grown person off their feet, temperatures so low that exposed skin would freeze in minutes. And her car, her ancient, unreliable car that barely ran on good days, was buried under a foot of snow with a battery that had been questionable before the temperature dropped to -30. Mara looked at Nolan, his small face flushed with fever, his breathing rapid and shallow. She looked at Jace, standing guard beside his brother's bed, with an expression that was too old for his face. She looked at her phone, at the contacts she'd deleted and re-added a dozen times over the years but never called. At the number that Marcus, Luca's head of security, the one who'd helped stage the photographs that destroyed her relationship, but who'd also slipped her $500 once when he'd seen her digging through a dumpster behind a restaurant, had given her 3 years ago with a quiet, just in case, for the boys. She'd never called it, never planned to call it. But Nolan's lips were starting to turn blue at the edges, and his breathing sounded like he was trying to pull air through a straw, and she was out of options. Mara dialed. It rang once. "Mara." Luca's voice came through immediately, alert despite the early hour. "What's wrong?" Not hello. Not why are you calling? Just an immediate understanding that she wouldn't reach out unless something was catastrophically wrong. "It's Nolan," she said, her voice cracking despite her best efforts to stay calm. "He's sick. Fever of 103 and climbing. He can't breathe right. I need to get him to a hospital, but the storm, my car won't start and I can't walk in this, and..." "Where are you?" "Harborview Mobile Home Park. Lot 24. "I'm 20 minutes out. Keep him warm. Keep him sitting up if you can. It'll help with the breathing. I'm coming." The line went dead. Mara stood frozen for a moment, phone still pressed to her ear, trying to process what had just happened. Luca was coming. She'd called him, and he was coming. "Mom?" Jace's voice was small, scared in a way she almost never heard from him. "Is Nolan going to be okay?" Mara forced herself to move, to function, to be the adult her children needed, even when every instinct was screaming at her to curl up and cry. "Yes," she said, with a conviction she didn't entirely feel. "Help is coming. We just need to hold on a little bit longer." She went back to Nolan's bedside and gathered him into her arms, angling his body so his head was elevated. He was burning up, his skin hot and dry, his eyes glassy when he managed to open them. "Mama," he whispered, "hurts to breathe." "I know, baby, I know. Just try to take slow breaths. Help is coming." The minutes crawled by with agonizing slowness. Mara counted Nolan's breaths, monitored the bluish tint at his lips, tried not to think about all the things that could go wrong before Luca arrived. If he arrived, what if he'd changed his mind? What if this was some kind of cruel joke, revenge for her hanging up on him yesterday? What if... The sound of an engine cut through the wind's howl. Mara's head snapped up. Through the frost-covered window, she could see lights, bright, powerful, cutting through the whiteout like searchlights. Not one vehicle, 3. The same black SUVs from yesterday, somehow navigating the unplowed streets of the trailer park like the laws of physics didn't apply to them. The lead vehicle stopped directly in front of her trailer. The door opened. Luca Voss stepped out into the blizzard like he was stepping out for a casual stroll. He was dressed for the weather this time, heavy coat, boots, gloves, but he still moved with that particular confidence that suggested the storm was merely an inconvenience rather than a life-threatening danger. He took the trailer steps in 2 strides and pounded on the door. Mara wrenched it open. For a moment, they just stared at each other. Then Luca's gaze moved past her to Nolan in her arms, and his entire expression shifted. "How bad?" he asked. "Bad?" His oxygen saturation was at 92% last time I checked. It should be 95 or higher. Luca didn't hesitate. He stepped into the trailer and moved straight to her, his hands already reaching for Nolan. "I've got him. The SUV has heat, and we can monitor his vitals on the way. Northwestern is ready for us." Mara's arms tightened around her son instinctively. "Trust me," Luca said quietly. "Please." It was the please that did it. She'd never heard Luca Voss say please to anyone. Mara released Nolan into his father's arms. Luca handled him with surprising gentleness, adjusting his hold so Nolan's head was supported and his airway was as open as possible. The boy stirred slightly, his fever-bright eyes focusing on the man carrying him. "Who?" Nolan started. "Shh," Luca said softly. "Save your energy. We're going to get you help." "Jace," Mara said, turning to her other son. "Get your coat, now." Jace was already moving, pulling on his worn jacket with quick, efficient movements. They piled out into the storm. The wind hit Mara like a physical force, stealing her breath and driving ice crystals into any exposed skin. Luca was already moving toward the SUV, Nolan bundled against his chest, moving with the kind of purposeful speed that suggested he'd navigated worse conditions. The rear door of the lead vehicle was open. A man Mara vaguely recognized, Marcus, the security chief, was gesturing them inside. "Heated blankets ready," he said, as Luca climbed in with Nolan. "Medical kit is under the seat. ETA to Northwestern is 15 minutes. Mara and Jace scrambled in after them. The interior of the SUV was like stepping into a different world. Warm, climate-controlled. Leather seats that probably cost more than her annual income. A small medical setup in the back that looked more comprehensive than some urgent care clinics. Luca was already wrapping Nolan in heated blankets, his movements practiced and sure. "Pulse ox," he said without looking up. Marcus handed him a small device. Luca clipped it onto Nolan's finger and watched the readout. 89%, he said, his voice tight. "He's dropping. We need to move. Now." The convoy lurched into motion. Mara found herself pressed against the far side of the vehicle with Jace tucked against her side, watching as Luca worked over Nolan with focused intensity. He grabbed an oxygen mask from the medical kit and fitted it over Nolan's face with gentle precision. "Breathe slowly, buddy," he murmured. "Nice and easy. The oxygen will help." Nolan's eyes tracked to him, glassy and confused. "Who are you?" he whispered through the mask. Luca's hands faltered for just a fraction of a second. "Someone who should have been here a long time ago," he said quietly. The drive to Northwestern Medical Center should have taken 30 minutes in normal conditions. Luca's drivers made it in 12, navigating the storm-ravaged streets with skill that was probably illegal and definitely impressive. They pulled up to the ER entrance and Luca was out of the vehicle before it fully stopped, Nolan in his arms, barking orders at the medical staff who appeared with a gurney. 6-year-old male, respiratory distress, fever of 103, oxygen saturation dropped to 89% in transit. The ER staff took over with practiced efficiency, transferring Nolan to the gurney and wheeling him inside. Mara tried to follow. A nurse stopped her at the doors. "Family only." "I'm his mother," Mara said, her voice sharp with barely controlled panic. "Of course. Right this way." They swept Nolan into a treatment room. Mara found herself pushed to the side as doctors and nurses swarmed her son, attaching monitors, starting an IV, adjusting oxygen flow. Luca was there too, answering questions with the kind of detailed information that suggested he'd memorized every relevant detail from the brief time in the SUV. "How did you know his medical history?" a doctor asked. "I didn't. I'm going on what the mother told me in transit," Luca said, then stepped back to let them work. He ended up next to Mara, both of them pressed against the wall, watching strangers try to save their son. "He's going to be okay," Luca said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of absolute fact, delivered with the kind of certainty that came from a man who was used to bending reality to his will through sheer force of determination. "You don't know that," Mara whispered. "Yes, I do, because I won't accept any other outcome." A doctor, young, female, competent-looking, approached them. "We've got him stabilized for now. Oxygen levels are coming back up. It's pneumonia, probably been developing for a few days. The fever and the respiratory distress are classic presentation. We're starting him on IV antibiotics and we'll need to keep him for at least 48 hours for observation." "Whatever he needs," Luca said immediately. "Insurance information?" Luca pulled out a black credit card. "Bill everything to me directly. No insurance necessary." The doctor's eyebrows rose, but she nodded and took the card. Mara felt like she was watching the scene from underwater. Everything slightly muffled, slightly unreal. "Mrs. Voss?" the doctor said. It took Mara a moment to realize the woman was talking to her. We're not," she started. "You can see him now," the doctor continued, either not hearing or not caring about the correction. "He's asking for his mom." Mara moved on autopilot, following the doctor to Nolan's bedside. Her son looked impossibly small in the hospital bed, surrounded by machines and monitors and tubes. But his color was better, his breathing was easier. His eyes were clearer when they focused on her. "Hi, baby," Mara said, her voice breaking. "Hi, Mama." Nolan's voice was rough, strained. I was scared. I know, I was scared too, but you're safe now. You're going to be fine. The man with the eyes brought me here. Yes, he did. Is he really my dad? Mara looked over her shoulder. Luca was standing in the doorway, Jace beside him, both of them watching, waiting. Yes, she said. He's really your dad. Nolan absorbed this, his expression thoughtful despite the fever and exhaustion. Okay, he said finally, then louder. Thank you for saving me. Luca crossed the room in 3 strides. You don't need to thank me, he said, his voice rough. This is what fathers do. They show up. They help. I'm sorry I didn't do it sooner. It's okay. You're here now. The simple forgiveness in those words broke something in Luca's expression. Mara watched him press his hand gently to Nolan's forehead, a gesture so instinctively paternal it made her chest ache, and saw the moment he felt the lingering fever. Rest, Luca said. Let the medicine work. I'll be right outside. Promise? Promise. They left Nolan to sleep and reconvened in the hallway outside the room. Jace had been silent through the entire ordeal, but now he stepped forward and looked up at Luca with an expression that was equal parts suspicious and calculating. You're our dad, he said. It wasn't a question. Yes. Where were you? The question was delivered with brutal directness. Luca crouched down so he was eye level with his son. That's complicated, he started. That's what Mom said. It's not complicated. Either you wanted to be here or you didn't. I didn't know you existed. Why not? Because I was lied to by people I trusted. They told me your mother had betrayed me, and I believed them instead of fighting to find out the truth. That was my mistake. My failure. Not your mother's. Not yours. Jay stared at him for a long moment. Are you going to leave again? No. How do I know you're telling the truth? You don't. You can't. Because I haven't proven it yet. Luca's voice was steady, honest. But I'm going to. Every single day. I'm going to show up and be present and do the work until you believe me. However long that takes. What if it takes forever? Then I'll spend forever proving it. Jace's expression didn't soften, but something shifted behind his eyes. A crack in the armor, maybe. A tiny opening that suggested he might be willing to consider the possibility that this man was telling the truth. Okay, Jace said finally. But I'm watching you. If you hurt Mom or Nolan, I'll make you sorry. The threat from a 6-year-old should have been laughable, but the way Luca's expression turned respectful suggested he took it completely seriously. Fair enough, he said. A nurse appeared to check on Nolan, giving them an excuse to move further down the hallway. Mara found herself alone with Luca for the first time in 7 years. The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything unsaid, everything that had broken, everything that might still be salvageable if they were brave enough to try. I talked to Maribel Crane, Luca said finally. Mara's head snapped up. When? Last night, after I saw you. I needed to know the truth. And she told me everything. About you collapsing at the gates, about the hospital, about my father's men threatening you. His voice was carefully controlled, but Mara could hear the rage underneath it. I confronted my father. He admitted it. All of it. The manufactured evidence, the blocked calls, the deliberate sabotage. Why are you telling me this? Because you deserve to know that I understand what was done to you, to us, and that I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't change 7 years. No, it doesn't. Nothing can change that. But maybe, he paused, choosing his words carefully, maybe we can change what happens next. Mara laughed, but there was no humor in it. What happens next? You go back to your empire and your fiancé and your life, and we go back to our trailer. That's what happens next. No fiancé. I ended it. That stopped her. What? Yesterday, after seeing you and the boys, I ended the engagement, told her I was done with that world. Luca ran a hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration that was achingly familiar. I also kicked my father out of the family house and took over his operations. Spent all night restructuring everything to cut ties with the more violent aspects of the business. Why? Because I don't want my sons growing up thinking their father is a monster. Because I don't want to look at them and see disgust in their eyes. Because, he stopped, his jaw working. Because I want to be better than my father, and that starts with making different choices. Mara studied him. This man who'd once been her entire world, who'd broken her so thoroughly she'd had to rebuild herself from fragments, who was standing here now claiming he wanted redemption. Pretty words, she said finally, but words are easy. Action is hard. Then watch me act, test me, push back, make me prove every single thing I just said. Luca stepped closer, his eyes intense. I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm asking you to let me try to earn those things. And if you fail, then I fail. But at least I'll fail trying to be present instead of succeeding at being absent. Before Mara could respond, Jace appeared at her elbow. Mom, the lady at the desk wants to talk to you about paperwork. Mara nodded and followed the nurse to handle the admission process. The forms were overwhelming, pages of medical history she didn't know, insurance information she didn't have, consent forms for treatments that might be necessary. She was halfway through the stack when she realized Luca had appeared beside her. Let me, he said quietly. I can handle it. I know you can. You've been handling everything alone for 7 years. I'm not saying you can't. I'm saying you don't have to. Not anymore. He took the clipboard from her hands and began filling out the sections she'd left blank. Medical history. Apparently, he'd already researched both boys online through public records and hospital databases. Insurance. His company's premium coverage that would ensure Nolan got the best possible care. Emergency contact information. He wrote his own name and number without asking permission. That's presumptuous, Mara said. Yes, it is. Tell me to remove it and I will. She didn't tell him to remove it. They spent the next 3 hours in the hospital waiting room while Nolan slept and the antibiotics did their work. Jace dozed fitfully in one of the uncomfortable plastic chairs. Luca made phone calls in a low voice, apparently rearranging his entire schedule. Mara just sat and tried to process the fact that her carefully constructed world had been turned inside out in less than 24 hours. A doctor came out around 2 p.m. Nolan's responding well to treatment. Fever's down to 100.2. Oxygen levels are stable. If he continues improving at this rate, we might be able to discharge him in 36 hours instead of 48. Relief washed over Mara in a wave so intense it made her dizzy. Can I see him? Of course. He's been asking for you, and for... The doctor checked his notes. His dad? Luca stood immediately. They went in together, a strange parody of a normal family, and found Nolan awake and looking infinitely better than he had that morning. Hi, he said, his voice still rough but stronger. I had scary dreams. What about, baby? Mara asked, settling into the chair beside his bed. That you couldn't find me. That I was lost, and you were looking, but you couldn't see me. I'll always find you. Always. Promise? Promise. Nolan's gaze shifted to Luca, who was standing slightly behind Mara like he wasn't sure he had the right to be closer. Are you really staying? Nolan asked him. Yes. Jace says you're lying, that all grown-ups lie when they say they'll stay. Luca's expression cracked. Your brother has every reason to believe that. I've given you both nothing but reasons not to trust me. But I'm going to change that, starting now, starting today. How? By showing up every day. Even when it's hard. Even when you don't want me there. Even when your mother tells me to leave. I'm going to keep showing up until you believe me. Nolan considered this with the serious thoughtfulness that seemed to be his default mode. Okay, he said finally, but if you break your promise, I'm going to be really mad. That's fair. A nurse came in to check Nolan's vitals, interrupting the moment. Mara stepped into the hallway, suddenly overwhelmed by the emotional weight of the last 12 hours. She made it about 10 feet before her legs gave out and she had to lean against the wall to stay upright. Luca was there immediately, his hand on her elbow, steadying her. When's the last time you ate? He asked. I don't know, yesterday sometime. Come on. He guided her to the hospital cafeteria and bought her a sandwich, soup, and coffee without asking what she wanted. It was exactly what she would have ordered for herself. They sat at a corner table, and Mara forced herself to eat even though everything tasted like cardboard. We need to talk about living arrangements, Luca said after a few minutes of silence. What about them? That trailer isn't safe. The mold alone is probably contributing to Nolan's respiratory issues. The electrical system is a fire hazard. The heating is inadequate. And based on what Marcus found out, you're 2 months behind on lot rent. Mara's spine stiffened. We're managing. You're surviving. That's not the same as managing. His voice was gentle but firm. I have a house, multiple houses actually, space, resources. I can... No, Mara, I said no. I'm not moving my children into your world, into that life. I've kept them away from it for 7 years and I'm not changing that now. I'm not asking you to join the organization. I'm asking you to let me provide a safe place for my sons to live. Your sons. The words tasted bitter. They were my sons when I was raising them alone. Now you show up with money and resources and suddenly they're your sons and I'm supposed to just be grateful? That's not what I meant. Isn't it? Mara leaned forward, her eyes blazing. You think you can fix 7 years with a checkbook and some pretty promises? You think money erases poverty and presence erases absence? No. I think money can give those boys a fighting chance at a future that doesn't involve watching their mother work herself to death. I think presence, consistent, daily, unglamorous presence, might eventually rebuild trust. I'm not trying to erase anything. I'm trying to do better going forward. By throwing money at the problem. By using the resources I have to help the people I should have been helping all along. Is that so wrong? Mara opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. Because the truth was, she didn't know. She'd spent 7 years being angry at Luca Voss, being furious at the system that had failed her, being determined to prove she could survive without help from anyone. And she had survived. But surviving wasn't the same as thriving. Her sons deserved better than cold trailers and expired food and respiratory infections that could have been prevented with better living conditions. I can't just move into your house, she said finally. That's too much, too fast. Then let me find you an apartment, somewhere safe, warm, with enough space for the boys to have their own rooms. I'll cover the rent and deposit. You can pay me back if it makes you feel better, though you don't have to. This feels like charity. This is child support, 7 years worth. It's the least I owe you. You don't owe me anything. I owe you everything, Luca said quietly. You kept my sons alive when I abandoned them. You raised them to be good kids, despite having every reason to raise them to hate me. You survived hell and came out the other side still fighting. So yes, Mara, I owe you everything. And I'm never going to be able to repay it, but I can at least make sure you don't have to choose between heat and food anymore. The words hung in the air between them. Mara felt tears burning behind her eyes and refused to let them fall. I need time to think about it, she said. Take all the time you need. But while you're thinking, the boys are staying in the hospital suite I've arranged. It has a pull-out couch and a shower and actual heat. Consider it a trial run. You arranged a suite? Called in a favor with the hospital administrator. Nolan gets better care, you get actual rest, and Jace doesn't have to sleep in a plastic chair. Everyone wins. Mara should have argued, should have maintained her pride and independence and rejected the help. But she was so tired, bone-deep, soul-weary tired. And the thought of a shower and a real bed and not having to worry about whether the trailer's heat was going to fail in the middle of the night was so seductive she couldn't bring herself to say no. Okay, she whispered, just for now, while Nolan's recovering. Just for now, Luca agreed. But they both knew it was the first crack in the wall she'd built between them. And once walls started cracking, they were very difficult to repair. The hospital suite was nicer than any place Mara had lived in the past 7 years. Private bathroom with a shower that had actual water pressure. A pull-out couch that was more comfortable than her bed at the trailer. A small kitchenette with a refrigerator that Luca had somehow already stocked with juice boxes, fruit, and sandwich materials. Mara stood in the middle of it and felt completely unmoored. Jace was exploring the space with the suspicious thoroughness of a detective searching for bugs. He opened every drawer, checked every corner, tested the locks on the windows. What are you doing? Mara asked. Making sure it's safe. It's a hospital suite, baby. It's safe. That's what people always say right before something bad happens. The cynicism in his voice made her heart crack a little. Nolan was settled in the hospital bed in the connected room, already looking better after just a few hours of antibiotics and proper oxygen. A nurse had just finished checking his vitals and declared him much improved, which was the best news Mara had heard in days. Luca had disappeared an hour ago with a promise to handle some things and a reminder that Marcus was stationed outside if they needed anything. The security presence should have felt invasive, but instead it just felt surreal, like she'd fallen through a portal into someone else's life. "Mom?" Nolan called from the other room. "Can you sit with me?" Mara went to him immediately, settling into the chair beside his bed. "How are you feeling, baby?" "Better, still tired, but I can breathe easier." He picked at the hospital blanket. "The man, Dad, he said he'd come back. Do you think he will?" "I think so." "You don't sound sure." "I'm not," Mara admitted. "But he's done everything he's promised so far. That's something." "Jace doesn't trust him." "I know." "Do you trust him?" Mara considered lying, then decided her sons deserved honesty. "I don't know yet. Trust is something you build over time. Your father and I, we had trust once, and it got broken. Building it back is going to take work. What if he breaks it again? Then we'll survive it, like we've survived everything else." Nolan seemed satisfied with this answer. He snuggled deeper into the blankets, his eyes already starting to drift closed again. "Mom, I'm glad he came. When I couldn't breathe and everything was scary, he made it better. That's what dads are supposed to do, right?" "Yeah, baby, that's what dads are supposed to do." She stayed with him until he fell asleep, then returned to the suite's main room to find Jace standing at the window, staring out at the Chicago skyline. "You should sleep," she told him. "I'm not tired." "You've been awake for almost 24 hours. So have you." Fair point. Mara joined him at the window. The storm had finally broken, leaving the city blanketed in pristine white snow that gleamed under the streetlights. It would be dirty and gray within days, churned to slush by traffic and salted into submission by the city crews. But for now, it was beautiful. "Do you hate him?" Jace asked suddenly. "Who?" "Our dad." Mara took a breath. "No, I did for a long time, but hate is exhausting, and it doesn't actually change anything." "Do you love him?" "I loved who he was 7 years ago. I don't know who he is now." "He's rich." "Yes, and powerful. Marcus told me he runs half the city." "Marcus talks too much." "Is that why you don't want to live in his house? Because of the power thing?" Mara looked down at her son, this too smart, too observant child who saw everything and missed nothing. "Partly, but mostly because I spent 7 years building a life where I made the decisions, where nobody could take things away from me because I didn't depend on anyone. Moving into his house means giving up that independence, and I'm not sure I'm ready for that. Even if it means we'd be warmer and Nolan wouldn't get sick as much?" The question was delivered without judgment, just genuine curiosity, and it cut deeper than any accusation could have. "I don't know," Mara whispered. "I'm trying to figure out what's best for you and your brother, but I don't have all the answers." Jace nodded slowly. Then, in a gesture that was rare for him, he leaned against her side. "It's okay if you don't know. Grown-ups don't have to know everything." Mara wrapped her arm around him and pulled him close. They stood there together, watching the city lights, until exhaustion finally claimed them both. Luca returned 3 hours later to find Mara asleep on the pull-out couch with Jace curled against her side, and Nolan sleeping peacefully in the hospital bed. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, just watching them, this family he'd missed, this life he'd abandoned without even knowing it existed. The guilt was crushing, but guilt, he was learning, was a useless emotion. It didn't change the past. It didn't help the present. It only mattered if it motivated action in the future. He'd spent the afternoon doing exactly that, taking action. The first call had been to his real estate manager, with instructions to find a 3-bedroom apartment in a good neighborhood with excellent schools nearby. Safe, clean, close to medical facilities. Price was irrelevant. The second call had been to his lawyer, initiating the paperwork to formally establish paternity and set up child support payments that would be backdated 7 years. The third call had been to Victor. That conversation had been brief and brutal. "You're making a mistake, Bassi," his father had said. "Then it's my mistake to make. You have 48 hours to vacate the estate. After that, security will remove you. I built that house. I built this empire." And I'm rebuilding it into something that won't poison everything it touches. Goodbye, Father. He'd hung up before Victor could respond. The fourth call had been the hardest. Celeste. We need to talk, she'd said when she answered. About yesterday. I think we both said things in the heat of the moment that we didn't mean. I meant every word. Silence. Then, you're really choosing them over me? Over the future we planned? I'm choosing my sons. That's not even a choice. That's basic human decency. Those children are a liability. That woman is using them to manipulate you. Stop talking, right now. Because if you finish that sentence, I'm going to make sure every social connection you have in this city evaporates. I'll ensure that every door that's ever been opened to you slams shut. I'll turn your name into something people whisper about in pity. Do you understand me? Another silence, this one shocked. You wouldn't dare. Test me. Celeste had made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. You've changed. That woman and those children have made you weak. No, they've made me realize that what I thought was strength was actually just cruelty wearing a nice suit. We're done, Celeste. The engagement is over. I'll have my lawyer send you the official termination of our business arrangements by end of week. He'd ended the call and immediately blocked her number. Now, standing in the hospital suite watching his son sleep, Luca felt something shift in his chest. Not quite peace. He hadn't earned that yet. But maybe the first hint of purpose that didn't revolve around power or control or building empires. Marcus appeared at his elbow, silent as always. The apartment's ready, 3-bedroom in Lincoln Square. Good schools, safe neighborhood. I've already had it furnished based on Mrs. Quinn's general taste profile from her trailer. You profiled her taste from a trailer? She had books, art prints on the walls. I paid attention. Marcus shrugged. Also hired a pediatrician who specializes in respiratory issues, Dr. Sarah Chen, highly rated. She's willing to do a home visit once they're settled. You did all that in 3 hours? You pay me to be efficient. Luca looked at his security chief, this man who'd been complicit in the original deception 7 years ago, who'd helped stage the photographs that destroyed Mara's trust, but who'd also apparently spent the last 3 hours trying to make amends. Why are you helping? Luca asked quietly. Marcus was silent for a long moment. Because I was there when she collapsed at the gates, he said finally. 7 years ago. I was one of the men your father ordered to turn her away. And I watched a pregnant woman crumple to the ground, and I did nothing. I've thought about that moment every day since. So if I can do something now, even something small, maybe I sleep a little better. Redemption's a long road, Marcus. So I'm learning. They stood together in comfortable silence until Luca's phone buzzed with an incoming text. Unknown number. This is Celeste. One last chance. Walk away from this insanity and we can still salvage our future. Choose them, and I'll make sure the entire city knows what kind of man you really are. Your choice. Luca stared at the message for a long moment. Then he forwarded it to his lawyer with a note. Harassment. Handle it. He deleted Celeste's message and pocketed his phone. Problem? Marcus asked. Nothing I can't handle. Nolan woke the next morning with his fever completely broken and his breathing back to normal. The attending physician declared him well enough to be discharged by the afternoon, provided he continued the antibiotic regimen and followed up with a pulmonologist within the week. Mara was helping him get dressed when Luca appeared in the doorway. How's the patient? Much better, Nolan said, his voice still a bit rough but infinitely stronger than it had been. The doctor said I'm tough. You are. You're also brave. Not everyone handles being sick that well. I was scared. Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you keep going even when you are scared. Nolan considered this, then nodded seriously. Jace appeared from the suite's bathroom, freshly showered and dressed in the same clothes he'd been wearing for 2 days. He looked at Luca with his usual suspicion. Are you taking us home? That depends, Luca said carefully. Your mother and I need to talk about where home is. We have a home. You have a trailer that's 2 months behind on rent and has a heating system that nearly killed your brother. That's not a home. That's a survival situation. It's our survival situation. Jace, Mara said sharply. That's enough. But it's true, we survived without him before. We can keep surviving without him now. Luca crouched down to Jace's level. You're absolutely right. You did survive without me. Your mother is one of the strongest people I've ever met, and she raised you to be strong too. But here's the thing about survival. It shouldn't be the goal. Thriving should be the goal. And I want to help you and your brother thrive. By throwing money at us? By using the resources I have to give you opportunities you deserve. Good schools, safe housing, medical care. Those aren't luxuries, those are basic rights. And you should have had them all along. What do you get out of it? The question was delivered with such adult cynicism that Luca actually flinched. A chance to know my sons. A chance to be present in your lives. A chance to prove I'm not the man who abandoned your mother 7 years ago. What if we don't want you in our lives? Then I'll respect that. But I'll still make sure you have everything you need, because being a father isn't conditional on being wanted. It's about showing up and doing the work regardless. Jay studied him with those steel gray eyes that were so much like Luca's own. I don't trust you, he said finally. I know, and I'm okay with that. Trust is earned, not given. But if you hurt Mom again, I'll make you regret it. I believe you. They held each other's gaze for another moment. Then Jace nodded and walked away. Mara appeared at Luca's side. He's protective, she said quietly. He should be. You're worth protecting. The words hung in the air between them. Before Mara could respond, a nurse appeared with discharge paperwork, and the moment passed. The drive from the hospital should have been simple. Instead, it became a negotiation conducted in careful words and loaded silences. I found an apartment, Luca said as they loaded into the SUV. 3 bedrooms, Lincoln Square, good schools nearby, safe neighborhood. I'd like you to at least look at it. I can't afford rent in Lincoln Square. I'm covering it. Consider it 7 years of back child support. That's too much. Actually, if I calculate what I should have been paying all along, it's not nearly enough. Mara opened her mouth to argue, then closed it, because she was tired of arguing, tired of fighting every battle alone, tired of pride being the only thing standing between her sons and a better life. Just look at it, Luca said softly. That's all I'm asking. Look at the apartment. If you hate it, we'll find something else, something you're comfortable with. And if I say I want to go back to the trailer, then I'll hire someone to fix everything that's broken, install a new heating system, and pay off your back rent. Whatever you decide, I'm making sure you and the boys are safe. Nolan piped up from the back seat where he was buckled in next to Jace. Can we see the new place, please? I want to see if I can have my own room. Jace shot his brother a look that clearly said traitor, but Nolan just smiled his sweet, hopeful smile. Mara sighed. Fine, we'll look at it. The apartment was in a beautiful brick building with actual security and an elevator that worked. The lobby had plants that were alive and thriving. The hallways smelled like cleaning solution instead of mildew. Mara felt like she'd stepped into a different universe. The apartment itself was on the 3rd floor. Marcus unlocked the door and stepped aside. Mara walked in and felt her breath catch. Hardwood floors, large windows that let in actual sunlight, a kitchen with appliances that looked new, a living room big enough for the boys to actually play without tripping over furniture, and 3 bedrooms. Nolan ran immediately to explore, his earlier illness apparently forgotten in his excitement. Jace followed more slowly, his expression carefully neutral. The master bedroom has an ensuite bathroom, Marcus said. The boys' rooms are set up with bunk beds for now, but that can be changed. Kitchen is fully stocked. Heat and electricity are included in the rent. Mara walked through the space in a daze. There were books on the shelves, new copies of ones she'd had in the trailer, art prints on the walls that matched her taste. Even the furniture was in colors she would have chosen herself. How did you... she started. Marcus is thorough, Luca said from behind her. She turned to find him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. This is too much. This is what my sons deserve. What you deserve. I can't just accept this. Why not? Because accepting this means accepting you. And I'm not ready for that. Luca stepped closer. Then don't accept me. Accept the apartment. Accept the stability. Accept the opportunity for your sons to have their own rooms and a safe place to live. Those things aren't conditional on your relationship with me. Everything's conditional. That's how the world works. Not this. This is unconditional. You never have to speak to me again after today, and this apartment is still yours. I'll put it in writing if you need me to. Mara stared at him. She wanted to say no, wanted to maintain her independence and her pride in her carefully constructed walls. But then Nolan appeared in the doorway of one of the bedrooms, his face lit up with pure joy. Mom, Mom, come see. There's a window seat and a bookshelf, and the bed is so soft. And just like that, Mara's resistance crumbled. Because this wasn't about her pride. It wasn't about her relationship with Luca. It was about her sons having a chance at something better than survival. Okay, she whispered. We'll take it, but I'm paying you back. Eventually, somehow. If that makes you feel better, fine, but you don't have to. Yes, I do. Because owing you means you have power over me. And I've spent 7 years making sure nobody has that power ever again. Luca's expression shifted into something that looked almost like pain. I don't want power over you, Mara. I never did. I just want to help. Help comes with strings. It always does. Then cut the strings. I'm offering no strings help. Take it. Use it. And if you decide tomorrow that you want nothing to do with me, that's fine. The apartment stays yours. The support stays in place. I made a vow to myself that I'm going to provide for my sons regardless of whether they want me in their lives. That's not conditional. Before Mara could respond, Jace appeared from the other bedroom. His expression was carefully controlled, but there was something in his eyes, a crack in the armor. It's nice, he said quietly. Really nice. You like it? Mara asked. The room has space for my books. And a desk. I could do homework at an actual desk instead of the kitchen table. He paused. But that doesn't mean I trust him. I know, baby. I'm just saying, the apartment is nice. That's different from trusting the person who provided it. Noted, Luca said gently. They spent the next hour moving the minimal belongings they had from the hospital suite into the apartment. It was a depressingly quick process. Everything they owned fit in 2 duffel bags and a few trash bags. Mara tried not to think about what that said about their life. Marcus brought in groceries and filled the refrigerator and pantry. Someone, Mara didn't ask who, had already stocked the bathroom with toiletries and the closets with basic clothes in the boys' sizes. There's also a small discretionary fund set up, Marcus mentioned casually, for immediate needs, school supplies, clothing, whatever the boys need. The card is in the kitchen drawer. How much? Mara asked suspiciously. Enough. That's not an answer. Marcus looked at Luca, who shrugged. 10,000 to start, Marcus said. Replenishes monthly. Mara felt like the floor had dropped out from under her. That's insane. We don't need that much. You need stability, Luca corrected. You need to not have to choose between medicine and food. You need to be able to buy Jace new glasses when his current ones break. You need to replace Nolan's inhaler without having to decide what bill doesn't get paid that month. That's what the money is for. I can't. You can, and you will. Because those boys deserve to have a mother who isn't constantly stressed about money. They deserve to have you actually present instead of working yourself to death trying to keep them fed. The words hit harder than Mara wanted to admit. Because he was right. She'd been so focused on survival that she'd forgotten what it felt like to just live. To not count every penny. To not wake up in a panic about bills she couldn't pay. This feels like a dream, she whispered. Then let yourself dream for a while. You've earned it. Mara looked around the apartment, at Nolan bouncing on his new bed with delight, at Jace carefully arranging his books on the shelf, at the space and light and safety that surrounded them. And for the first time in 7 years, she let herself believe that maybe things could actually get better. The next 3 days passed in a blur of normalcy that felt surreal. Nolan recovered quickly, his energy returning in full force. Jace explored every corner of the apartment and the surrounding neighborhood with the thoroughness of a general surveying new territory. Mara learned how to use appliances that actually worked and marveled at the simple luxury of hot water that didn't run out after 5 minutes. Luca appeared every day, not intrusively, not demandingly, just present. He brought breakfast the first morning, bagels and cream cheese and fresh fruit. He sat with the boys and asked them questions about their interests, their favorite subjects, their dreams. Jace answered in monosyllables and suspicious glares. Nolan chattered away like Luca was a long-lost friend. The second day, Luca took them to a bookstore and told them each to pick out 5 books. Jace chose science texts and mystery novels. Nolan chose fantasy stories about dragons and knights. Luca bought them all without blinking at the total. The third day, he showed up with a man he introduced as Dr. Chen. "I hear someone's been having breathing troubles," the doctor said to Nolan with a kind smile. The examination was thorough and professional. When it was done, Dr. Chen sat down with Mara and explained that Nolan's respiratory issues were likely chronic but manageable with the right treatment plan. The good news is, removing him from the mold exposure should help significantly. I'm prescribing a better inhaler and recommending some breathing exercises. Follow up in a month and we'll reassess. "How much do I owe you?" Mara asked. Dr. Chen smiled. "Mr. Voss has already handled it. I'm on retainer for the family." The casual way she said the family, like Mara and the boys were just naturally part of Luca's world, made something twist in Mara's chest. That evening, after the boys were in bed, Mara found Luca sitting on the apartment building's front steps. He looked tired, more than tired, exhausted in a way that went beyond physical weariness. "You don't have to sit out here," Mara said. "You can come up." "Didn't want to intrude. You said you needed space." "I did. I do. But you can have coffee with me without it being an intrusion." Luca looked up, surprised. "Coffee? I bought the good stuff with your ridiculous grocery budget. Seemed wasteful to drink it alone." They went upstairs. Mara made coffee in a kitchen that had counter space and a coffee maker that didn't require percussive maintenance to work. They sat at the small dining table, an actual dining table, not a cramped kitchen corner, and let the silence stretch between them. "Thank you," Mara said finally. "For what?" "All of this. The apartment, the doctor, the stability. I know I've been resistant and difficult, and you've been protecting yourself and your sons. That's not difficult. That's smart." "I want to hate you," Mara said quietly. "It would be so much easier if I could just hate you. But you can't. No. Because you keep showing up. You keep doing exactly what you say you're going to do. And that makes it really hard to maintain the narrative I've been telling myself for 7 years. What narrative? That you were a coward who chose power over love. That you abandoned me because I wasn't important enough. That you never really cared." She looked down at her coffee. "But then you show up every day. You sit with the boys. You don't push. You just exist in our space and try to be helpful. And it's confusing." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. Confusing is better than certain hatred." Luca reached across the table like he was going to take her hand, then seemed to think better of it and pulled back. "I know I can't fix 7 years," he said. "I know I can't make up for not being there, but I can be here now. I can show up every day and try to be the father those boys deserve. And if that's confusing or uncomfortable or difficult for you, I'm sorry, but I'm not going to stop." "I don't want you to stop," Mara admitted. "That's what scares me. I don't want you to stop showing up, and that means I'm starting to depend on you, and dependence is dangerous." "Why?" "Because people leave. They always leave. And the more you depend on them, the harder it is when they go." "I'm not leaving." "You say that now. I'll say it tomorrow too, and the day after, and every day until you believe me." Mara wanted to argue, wanted to protect herself with cynicism and walls and the hard-earned knowledge that trust was a liability. But she was so tired of being alone, so tired of carrying everything by herself, so tired of pretending she didn't want exactly what Luca was offering: partnership, support, presence. "I'm going to hold you to that," she said instead. "Good. Hold me accountable. Test me, push back, make me prove every promise." They sat together in comfortable silence until the coffee was gone and the night had deepened into full darkness. When Luca finally stood to leave, he paused at the door. "Mara? For what it's worth, I never stopped caring. I was manipulated and lied to, and I chose to believe the worst instead of fighting for the truth. But I never stopped caring about you. I just stopped trusting myself to make the right choices. And that was the biggest mistake of my life." He left before she could respond. Mara stood in the doorway long after he was gone, her heart doing complicated things in her chest. The next morning, everything changed. Mara woke to find her phone exploding with notifications, text messages, missed calls, social media alerts. She opened the first one and felt her blood turn to ice. It was a news article from the Chicago Tribune's gossip section, Crime King's Secret Family. Luca Voss's Hidden Sons. Discovered. Below the headline was a photo. Grainy, clearly taken from a distance but unmistakable. Her and the boys outside the apartment building. Luca with his hand on Nolan's shoulder, looking down at him with obvious affection. The article was vicious. It detailed Luca's abandonment of his trailer park mistress. It implied Mara had been hiding the children deliberately to extort money. It questioned whether the boys were even his. It painted her as a gold digger and him as a fool being manipulated, and it had been written by someone with inside information. Someone who knew details that hadn't been public. Mara scrolled through the comments and felt sick. Gold digger. Trash using kids to trap a rich man. Those poor children being raised by someone like that. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, then decided she needed to know how bad this was getting. Mara Quinn? A female voice, professional and cold. Yes? This is Jennifer Walsh from Channel 7 News. I'd love to get your side of the story regarding your relationship with Luca Voss, and Mara hung up. The phone rang again immediately. Different number. She turned off her phone. There was a knock at the door. Mara looked through the peephole and saw 3 people with cameras and microphones clustered in the hallway. Press. They'd found her. She backed away from the door, her heart racing. The boys. She had to protect the boys. Mara ran to their bedroom and found Jace already awake, staring at his own phone with a stricken expression. "Mom," he said quietly. "Someone posted pictures of us at school." "What?" He showed her his screen. Social media posts. Dozens of them. Photos of the boys at their old school. Comments speculating about their parentage. Cruel jokes about poverty and illegitimacy. Someone had doxed them, posted their names, their ages, their school information, and now the entire internet was picking apart her children's lives. Mara felt rage ignite in her chest, white hot and all-consuming. She grabbed her phone, turned it back on, and called the one person who could fix this. Luca answered on the first ring. "I saw the article," he said immediately. "I'm handling it. My lawyer is... They're outside my door, the press. They have cameras. And someone posted pictures of the boys online with their personal information. Someone who knew things they shouldn't have known." Silence. Then, Celeste. The name was delivered with such cold fury that Mara actually shivered. "I'm coming," Luca said. "Don't open the door. Don't talk to anyone. I'll be there in 10 minutes. He was there in 7. Mara watched through the peephole as Luca emerged from the elevator with Marcus and 2 other large men who radiated professional violence. The press scattered like startled birds. Luca's knock was sharp, controlled. Mara opened the door and he stepped inside, his eyes immediately going to the boys. Jace was sitting on the couch, his arms wrapped around Nolan, both of them looking small and scared. "Are you boys okay?" Luca asked, his voice gentle despite the rage Mara could see simmering in his expression. "People are saying mean things about Mom," Nolan said, his voice small. "I know, and that's going to stop, right now." Luca pulled out his phone and made a call. "This is Luca Voss. I need a statement released immediately to every major news outlet in Chicago." Worded exactly like this. Mara listened as he dictated a press release that was both an acknowledgement and a declaration of war. He claimed the boys publicly, acknowledged that he'd been unaware of their existence due to family interference, stated that he was pursuing full legal rights as their father, and made it absolutely clear that any further harassment of his children or their mother would be met with legal action so aggressive it would bankrupt anyone stupid enough to continue. When he finished the call, he looked at Mara. "I'm sorry, this is my fault. I should have anticipated that Celeste would do something like this." "Your ex-fiancée released the story?" "She had the information, the timeline, the inside details. It had to be her. Can you prove it?" "I don't need to prove it. I just need to make it clear what happens to people who threaten my family." The word family hung in the air. Luca's phone rang. He glanced at the screen and his expression went absolutely arctic. "It's her," he answered on speaker. "Celeste." "Luca, darling." Her voice was saccharine sweet. "I assume you saw the news." "I did." "Then you understand the position you're in. Your reputation is in tatters. Those children are being discussed on every gossip site in the city. That woman you're so desperate to protect is being torn apart in the comments. This is what happens when you choose trash over class. Mara watched Luca's expression and saw something terrifying, not rage. Rage would have been manageable. This was cold, calculated fury, the kind that came from a man who'd spent years learning how to destroy people and was now applying that knowledge with surgical precision. "Here's what's going to happen, Celeste," he said, his voice soft and deadly. "You're going to release a public apology. You're going to admit that you released private information in a moment of petty revenge. You're going to donate $1 million to a children's charity of my choosing, and you're going to do all of this within the next 24 hours. Or what? You'll sue me? I have lawyers too, darling. No, I'll destroy you. I'll release every private detail of your life that you've worked so hard to hide. The affairs, the drug use, the embezzlement from your father's company that I helped you cover up 3 years ago. Every secret, every lie, every carefully constructed piece of your image, I'll burn it all down and salt the earth behind me." "You're bluffing." "Am I? You just used my children as weapons. You posted pictures of 6-year-old boys online and invited strangers to tear them apart. Do you really think I'm bluffing about what I'll do to protect them?" Silence on the other end of the line. "You're insane," Celeste finally said, but her voice had lost its confidence. "No, I'm a father, and you just threatened my sons. So yes, Celeste, I'm absolutely willing to burn your entire world down. 24 hours. Clock's ticking." He ended the call. The apartment was silent. Then Nolan spoke up, his voice small but clear. "You called us your sons." Luca turned to look at him, and the cold fury in his expression melted into something softer. "You are my sons, both of you, and nobody gets to hurt you and walk away from it." "Even if it means destroying someone?" Jace asked quietly. "Especially then. Because protecting you is more important than being nice. Being a father means standing between you and anything that threatens you, even if that thing is a person with money and power and connections." "What if they try to hurt Mom?" Nolan asked. "Then they learn what happens when they make that mistake." Mara felt tears burning behind her eyes. She'd spent 7 years teaching herself that nobody was coming to save her, that she had to be her own hero, that depending on anyone was a weakness that would be exploited. But watching Luca stand there with absolute conviction, promising to protect her sons with every resource he had, something inside her shifted. Maybe strength wasn't about doing everything alone. Maybe strength was knowing when to accept help. Maybe strength was trusting someone to stand beside you instead of always standing alone. "Thank you," she whispered. Luca met her eyes across the room. "You don't need to thank me for doing what I should have been doing all along." Outside, the city continued its normal rhythms, traffic and noise and life going on as always. But inside the apartment, something fundamental had changed. The walls Mara had built were still there, but for the first time in 7 years, she could see the possibility of them coming down. The media storm lasted exactly 18 hours. Then it stopped as abruptly as it had started, replaced by a news story that dominated every news outlet in Chicago. Celeste Wynn's very public, very humiliating fall from grace. Mara watched it unfold from the safety of the apartment with a mixture of satisfaction and unease. Celeste's tearful apology appeared first, delivered at a hastily arranged press conference where she admitted to releasing private information in a moment of poor judgment, and announced a $1 million donation to the Chicago Children's Hospital Foundation. Her voice trembled. Her makeup was perfect, but her eyes were dead, the look of someone who just lost a war they'd been certain they'd win. Then came the follow-up stories. Anonymous sources leaked details about Celeste's affairs, her recreational drug use at charity galas, her habit of embezzling from her father's company to fund a lifestyle that even her considerable trust fund couldn't support. Each revelation was carefully timed, precisely damaging, and utterly devastating to her social standing. By the end of the day, Celeste Wynn had gone from Chicago's most eligible socialite to a cautionary tale about hubris and revenge. Mara should have felt triumphant. Instead, she felt vaguely sick. "You didn't have to destroy her," she said to Luca when he appeared that evening with takeout and an update on the situation. "Yes, I did. She threatened my children. There had to be consequences." This seems extreme. She posted pictures of 6-year-old boys online and invited strangers to dissect their lives. She called you trash in a public forum. She tried to use my sons as leverage in a petty power play. Luca's voice was calm, measured, and absolutely immovable. Extreme would have been what I wanted to do. This was actually restraint. What did you want to do? Things that would have required Marcus to find a very deep hole in a very remote location. He said it so casually that it took Mara a moment to realize he wasn't entirely joking. That's terrifying. That's fatherhood. When someone threatens your children, the civilized part of your brain shuts down and something much older takes over. Something that's willing to do absolutely anything to protect them. Mara looked at him. This man who'd once been a boy she loved, who'd become a stranger, who was now transforming into someone she was starting to recognize again. "You've changed," she said quietly. "So have you. Not like this. I've just gotten harder. You've gotten—" She paused, searching for the right word. "Purposeful. Like you finally figured out what you're fighting for instead of just what you're fighting against." "I'm fighting for them." Luca gestured toward the boys' bedroom, where Jace and Nolan were supposedly doing homework, but were probably actually reading under the covers. "For you. For the family I should have had 7 years ago. We're not a family. Not yet. But we could be, if you let us." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility and risk. Before Mara could respond, Jace appeared in the doorway. "Mom, Nolan wants to know if he can have dessert before dinner since the world almost ended yesterday and we survived." Despite everything, Mara laughed. "Tell your brother that surviving media scrutiny doesn't earn him ice cream privileges." "That's what I said. But he made me ask anyway because he said you're nicer when the dad guy is here." "The dad guy has a name," Luca said mildly. "I know. I'm just not ready to use it yet." The honesty was brutal and pure. Luca nodded slowly. "Fair enough. Take your time." Jace studied him for a long moment, then disappeared back into the bedroom. "He's warming up to you," Mara said. "Is he?" Because that felt like a very polite version of "I still don't trust you." For Jace, that is warming up. 2 weeks ago, he would have just glared at you silently. Now he's at least acknowledging your existence. "I'll take it." They ate dinner together that night, all 4 of them crowded around the small dining table, passing containers of Thai food and arguing about whether pad Thai or drunken noodles were superior. Nolan chattered about a book he was reading. Jace corrected his brother's plot summary with pedantic precision. Luca asked questions that suggested he was actually listening instead of just pretending. And Mara watched them and felt something dangerous unfurl in her chest. Hope. After dinner, Luca stayed to help with dishes. Mara washed, he dried, and they moved around each other in the small kitchen with surprising ease. "I need to ask you something," Luca said as he put away the last plate. "Okay." "The boys' school. They're currently enrolled at Lincoln Elementary, which according to Marcus's research is overcrowded, underfunded, and has a bullying problem that administration refuses to address. It's the school in our zone district, or the district where the trailer was anyway. I'd like to transfer them to Parker Academy. It's private, highly rated, and has an excellent program for gifted students, which both boys qualify for, based on the achievement test they took last year." Mara's defenses went up immediately. Private school feels like a lot. Why? Because it's another way of separating them from the life they've known. Another reminder that they're different now because their father has money. Or it's an opportunity for them to get an education that matches their potential instead of being held back by a system that's failing them. You're very good at making everything sound reasonable. I'm good at recognizing when pride is getting in the way of what's best for the boys. They're smart, Mara. Brilliant, actually. Jace tested at a 9th grade reading level. Nolan's math scores put him 3 years ahead of his peers. Lincoln Elementary isn't equipped to challenge them. Parker is. Did Marcus investigate my children's academic records? Marcus investigates everything. It's what I pay him for. Mara wanted to be angry about the invasion of privacy. But Luca was right. The boys were being held back by a school system that had too many students and too few resources. She'd known it for years, but hadn't had the money or the options to do anything about it. Now she had options. The realization was both liberating and terrifying. "I want to visit the school first," she said finally. See it myself. Talk to the teachers. Make sure it's actually a good fit, and not just an expensive way to warehouse rich kids. Absolutely. I'll arrange a tour for tomorrow. And the boys get a say. If they hate it, we don't force it. Agreed. And no pulling strings to get them in if they don't meet the actual admission requirements. They'll meet them. Have you seen Jace's reading comprehension scores? The kid's a genius. There was pride in Luca's voice, pure, uncomplicated pride in children he'd only known for 2 weeks. It made Mara's throat tight. Okay, she said. We'll look at the school. Luca smiled, and for a moment he looked exactly like the boy she'd fallen in love with a lifetime ago. Open, hopeful, unguarded. Then his phone rang. He glanced at the screen and his expression shifted into something harder. I need to take this. It's about the business restructuring. He stepped into the hallway, and Mara heard his voice drop into the cold, controlled tone he used for dealing with his criminal empire. Because that was the other reality she kept trying not to think about. Luca Voss might be playing father and bringing takeout and arranging school tours, but he was still a crime lord. Still the man who controlled illegal operations across 3 states. Still someone who solved problems with threats and violence when necessary. And she was letting him into her son's lives. The thought kept her awake long after Luca left that night. Parker Academy turned out to be everything Luca had promised, and nothing like Mara had feared. The building was beautiful without being ostentatious. Red brick and large windows, with a playground that had actual equipment instead of rusted swings and broken slides. Inside, the classrooms were bright and organized. The library was extensive. The science lab had supplies that looked like they'd been purchased sometime this decade. The principal, Dr. Helen Morrison, was a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who greeted them with professional warmth and immediately engaged both boys in conversation. So, you like mysteries? She asked Jace after he mentioned his reading preferences. Yes, I like figuring things out before the detective does. Have you read any Agatha Christie? All of them, twice. Dr. Morrison's eyebrows rose. Impressive. What about Dorothy Sayers, Rex Stout? Not yet. Well, our library has an excellent mystery collection. I think you'd particularly enjoy Gaudy Night. It's a locked-room mystery set at Oxford that's really more about intellectual integrity than murder. Jace's eyes lit up in a way Mara rarely saw. Meanwhile, Nolan was being shown the art room by a teacher who explained their philosophy of letting students explore creative expression without rigid structure. Can I paint whatever I want? Nolan asked. Absolutely. We believe art should be joyful, not prescribed. Even dragons. Especially dragons. Nolan beamed. By the end of the tour, both boys were asking when they could start. Mara pulled Dr. Morrison aside while Luca distracted the boys with promises of ice cream. I need to be honest with you, Mara said. My son's father has money and connections. I don't. I've raised them in poverty for 7 years. They're brilliant kids, but they're also behind in some areas because I couldn't afford tutors or enrichment programs, or half the things other parents take for granted. If you're only accepting them because of who their father is. Mrs. Quinn, Dr. Morrison interrupted gently, I've been doing this for 30 years. I can spot a gifted child regardless of their socioeconomic background. Your sons are exceptional. Jace has the kind of analytical mind we rarely see even in high school students. Nolan has emotional intelligence and creativity that can't be taught. They've earned their place here based on merit, not money. They come with baggage. The media circus from last week is already yesterday's news. And frankly, I'm more concerned with whether they're kind and curious than whether they've been in the tabloids. Dr. Morrison smiled. We've had children of celebrities, politicians, and yes, people with complicated backgrounds. What matters is who the children are, not who their parents are. Mara felt something loosen in her chest. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Wait until you see the homework load. We challenge our students here. Your boys are going to have to work for their grades. They're used to working for things. Then they'll do just fine. The enrollment process took a week. Applications, interviews, placement tests that both boys aced with room to spare. When the acceptance letters arrived, Jace read his 3 times with an expression of quiet satisfaction. Nolan ran through the apartment, whooping with joy. We're going to a fancy school, Nolan announced, with art and science and a library that has 1,000 books. 10,000, Jace corrected. They have 10,000 books. That's so many books. Mara watched them celebrate and felt tears sting her eyes. This was what she'd wanted for them all along: opportunity, potential, a future that wasn't limited by circumstances they couldn't control. And she'd gotten it by accepting help from the one person she'd sworn she'd never depend on. Luca appeared that evening with shopping bags full of school supplies and uniforms. The uniform policy is strict, he explained as he unpacked everything. Navy blazers, white shirts, khaki pants, and yes, I got the official ones from the school supplier before you ask. I was going to ask. I know, you're predictable that way. Is that a criticism? It's an observation. You always assume I'm trying to take shortcuts or buy my way through problems. Sometimes I'm just trying to make sure my kids have what they need. Our kids? Luca stopped unpacking and looked at her. What? You said my kids. They're our kids. Oh, something shifted in his expression. Surprise and gratitude and something deeper that Mara wasn't ready to name. Our kids, he repeated softly. Yeah, they are. The moment stretched between them, heavy with implications neither was ready to address directly. Then Jace appeared, interrupting whatever might have happened next. The blazer is itchy, he announced, already wearing his uniform despite it being weeks before school started. You'll get used to it, Luca said. What if I don't? Then you'll be itchy for 8 hours a day, but you'll also be getting an education that will let you be whatever you want to be when you grow up. Seems like a fair trade. Jace considered this with his usual seriousness. I want to be a lawyer, the kind that helps people who can't afford fancy lawyers. That's a noble goal. Will you be disappointed if I don't want to work in your business? The question was delivered with brutal directness. Luca crouched down to Jace's eye level. I will be proud of you for choosing to help people instead of hurt them. I will be proud of you for being better than me. And I will support whatever path you choose, even if that path is deliberately different from mine. What if I choose to be exactly like you? Then I'll support that too. But I'll also make sure you understand the cost of this life before you commit to it. The violence, the moral compromises, the way it changes you into someone you don't always recognize. I don't want you to make my choices. I want you to make informed choices. Jace nodded slowly. Can I ask you something? Anything. Why did you really come back? When Mom called about Nolan being sick, you could have just sent a car or ignored her completely, but you came yourself. Why? Luca was quiet for a long moment. Because the moment I saw you and your brother on that street 2 weeks ago, something shifted in my priorities. Everything I thought mattered, power, territory, reputation, all of it became secondary to making sure you two were safe and loved and had every opportunity I could give you. I came because not coming wasn't an option, because you're my sons, and that means I show up, every time, no matter what. Even if it's inconvenient, especially then. Even if we don't want you to? Yes, because being a father isn't about being wanted. It's about being present and doing the work regardless of whether it's appreciated. You don't have to like me, Jace, but you're stuck with me trying. Jace studied him with those steel gray eyes that were so much like Luca's own. Okay, he said finally. I can work with that. It was the closest thing to acceptance Jace had offered since they'd met. Luca looked like he'd just won the lottery. That night, after the boys were asleep and Luca had returned to whatever business he conducted in the shadows, Mara sat alone in the quiet apartment and tried to process how completely her life had changed in 2 weeks. 2 weeks ago, she'd been dragging a scrap cart through the snow, counting pennies, and hoping the trailer's heat would last through the night. Now she was living in a beautiful apartment with her sons enrolled in a prestigious private school, with medical care and stability and resources she'd never dreamed of having. And it had all come from accepting help from Luca Voss, from trusting the man who'd abandoned her, from letting her walls come down just enough to let him prove he'd changed. Her phone buzzed with a text. Luca, thank you for giving me a chance. I know I don't deserve it, but I'm going to earn it. I promise. Mara stared at the message for a long time. Then she typed back, don't thank me yet. Earning it is going to take a lot more than 2 weeks of good behavior. Luca, I know. I'm ready for the long game. Mara, we'll see. But even as she sent it, she knew she was already starting to believe him, starting to trust that maybe, just maybe, he was telling the truth about staying. The following weeks fell into a rhythm that felt almost normal. Luca appeared every morning at 7 to have breakfast with the boys before their new school started. He helped with homework, listened to Nolan's stories about art class, and engaged in serious debates with Jace about criminal justice reform that were way above the level of normal parent-child conversation. He took them to museums and bookstores and the aquarium. He sat through a 2-hour performance of Nolan's school play, where his son had exactly 3 lines and beamed with pride like he was watching a Broadway production. He showed up at Jace's first debate club meeting and took notes on the arguments like he was preparing for trial. And slowly, so slowly, Mara almost didn't notice it happening, Jace's walls started to crack. It began with small things, Jace asking Luca's opinion on a book, Jace accepting a ride to school instead of insisting they take the bus, Jace laughing at one of Luca's terrible jokes. Then came the bigger shift. It happened on a Saturday morning when Luca arrived with materials for a science project Jace had been struggling with. "I thought we could work on the solar system model together," Luca said, "if you want help." Jace had been trying to build it alone for days, frustration mounting with each failed attempt to get the orbital paths correct. "I don't need help," he said automatically. "I know, but I'd like to help anyway, if you'll let me." Jace stared at the materials: poster board, paint, wire, foam balls in varying sizes. "Fine," he said finally, "but only because Nolan keeps knocking over my planets, and I need someone to keep him distracted." They spent 3 hours in the living room building and painting and discussing planetary rotation and gravitational fields. Luca explained concepts in ways that made them accessible without being condescending. Jace absorbed the information like a sponge and asked questions that would have challenged college students. Mara watched from the kitchen and felt her heart do complicated things. This was what she'd wanted for Jace all along, a father who engaged with his brilliant mind, who challenged him, who made him feel heard and valued. When they finished, the solar system model was a work of art and scientific accuracy. Jace held it carefully, his expression proud. "Thanks," he said quietly, "for helping. Anytime. That's what dads do." Jace looked up at him. "Can I call you Dad? Instead of the dad guy?" Luca's expression cracked open, raw emotion visible for just a moment before he controlled it. "I would really like that," he said, his voice rough. "Okay. Dad?" The word hung in the air, precious and fragile. Nolan appeared from the bedroom where he'd been reading. "Does this mean I can call him Dad too?" "If you want to," Jace said. "I do." Nolan launched himself at Luca with the kind of full-body trust that only children possess. "Hi, Dad." Luca caught him automatically, pulling both boys into an embrace that was equal parts awkward and beautiful. Mara turned away before they could see her crying. That evening, after the boys were in bed, Luca found her on the apartment's small balcony. "Hey," he said softly. "Hey. Jace called me Dad today, I heard. It was the best moment of my life, followed immediately by the worst moment when I realized how many moments like that I've already missed." Luca leaned against the railing beside her. 7 years of birthdays and first words and skinned knees and nightmares. 7 years of being the person they needed, and I wasn't there for any of it. You're here now. Is that enough? "I don't know," Mara said honestly, "but it's a start. What if it's not enough? What if I can never make up for those missing years?" "Then you don't make up for them. You just move forward and be present for the years you do get. The boys don't need you to be perfect. They need you to be consistent, to show up, to keep your promises. Like you've done for 7 years. I did what I had to do. You did what most people couldn't do. You survived impossible circumstances and raised 2 incredible kids who are kind and smart and resilient. You're the strongest person I've ever met." Mara laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I'm not strong. I'm exhausted. I'm terrified all the time. I just got really good at hiding it. That's exactly what strength is. Continuing forward even when you're terrified." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the city lights. Then Luca spoke again, his voice careful. "I need to tell you something about the business." Mara's defenses went up immediately. "What about it?" "I'm getting out. Not immediately. You can't just walk away from this kind of operation without causing a power vacuum that gets people killed. but I'm systematically dismantling the violent aspects, the drug trade, the extortion, the enforcement operations. I'm transitioning to legitimate enterprises. It's going to take time, maybe 2 years, but I'm committed to it. Why? Because I don't want my sons growing up with a father who's a criminal. I don't want them visiting me in prison. I don't want them to be ashamed of where their money comes from. And I don't want you to have to explain to them that their father is a good man who does terrible things. Are you a good man who does terrible things? Luca was quiet for a long moment. I used to think I was. Now, I'm not sure. I've done things I'm not proud of, hurt people who probably deserved it, but also some who didn't. Built an empire on fear and violence and the willingness to cross lines other people won't cross. I can't undo any of that, but I can stop adding to it. What if you can't get out? What if the life pulls you back in? Then I keep fighting to get out, because the alternative is losing my sons, losing you, and that's not acceptable. You don't have me to lose, don't I? The question was soft, weighted with meaning. Mara turned to face him fully. What are you asking me, Luca? I'm asking if there's a possibility of us being more than co-parents, more than two people connected only by our children. If there's a chance you could ever forgive me enough to consider, he paused, choosing his words carefully, to consider letting me back into your life as more than just the boy's father. That's a lot to ask. I know. You hurt me, badly, and I spent 7 years learning to be okay without you. I know that too. So why would I risk that again? Why would I open myself up to being hurt like that a second time? Because I'm not the same person who hurt you. Because I've learned what matters and what doesn't. Because I love you. The words fell into the space between them like a bomb. You love me, Mara repeated flatly. I never stopped. I was manipulated and lied to, and I made terrible choices based on false information. But the feelings were always real, are still real. And if you need me to prove that every day for the rest of my life, I will. Love isn't enough. No, it's not. But love plus consistent action plus time plus trust, built through reliability, that might be enough. If you'll give me the chance to find out. Mara wanted to say no, wanted to protect herself, wanted to keep the walls up that had kept her safe for 7 years. But she was so tired of being alone, so tired of carrying everything by herself, so tired of pretending she didn't want exactly what Luca was offering, partnership, love, the possibility of being a family instead of just co-parents. I'm not ready to give you an answer, she said finally. That's okay. I'll wait. It might be a long wait. I've got time. You're sure about that? Because I'm not an easy person to love. I'm stubborn and independent, and I have trust issues that would require years of therapy to unpack. Good thing I'm patient and persistent and willing to do whatever work is necessary. Luca stepped closer. I'm not asking for easy, Mara. I'm asking for a chance, that's all. Just a chance to prove that we could be good together, that we could build something real. What if we try and it doesn't work? What if we mess it up and it affects the boys? Then we'll handle it like adults and make sure they're protected. But what if we don't try and spend the rest of our lives wondering what might have been? Isn't that a worse outcome? Mara didn't have an answer for that. So instead, she did something she hadn't allowed herself to do in 7 years. She let Luca pull her into his arms. He held her carefully, like she was something precious that might break. She let herself lean into his strength, just for a moment, just long enough to remember what it felt like to not carry everything alone. I'm scared, she whispered against his chest. Me too. What if you leave again? I won't, I promise you, Mara. I'm done leaving. I'm done making choices based on fear or manipulation or other people's expectations. I'm choosing you. I'm choosing the boys. I'm choosing this family. And I'll keep choosing it every single day until you believe me. Mara pulled back enough to look up at him. Ask me again in 6 months. What? Ask me again in 6 months if I'll give us a chance. If you're still showing up every day, still being present, still proving you're serious about getting out of the criminal life and being a real father, then I'll give you an answer. That's fair? And until then, we're co-parents. Friends, maybe, but nothing more. I can work with that. Can you? Because 6 months of showing up without any promise of a relationship at the end is asking a lot. Mara, I'd show up for 6 years if that's what it took. I'd show up for the rest of my life, because you and the boys are worth it. This family is worth it. and I'm done taking shortcuts or expecting things to be easy. I'm ready to do the work. Mara searched his expression for any sign of deception or doubt. She found only sincerity. Okay, she said quietly. 6 months. We'll see where we are then. 6 months, Luca agreed. He kissed her forehead, gentle, chaste, full of promise, and then stepped back. I should go. Early morning tomorrow. Business? Legitimate business. I'm meeting with my lawyers about the transition plan. Luca? Yeah? Thank you. For everything, for showing up, for fighting for the boys, for... She paused. For not giving up on us. Never. I'll never give up on this family. He left, and Mara stood on the balcony long after his car pulled away, watching the city lights and feeling hope war with fear in her chest. 6 months. She could handle 6 months of waiting to see if Luca Voss would actually keep his promises. She'd survived 7 years alone. 6 months was nothing. But even as she thought it, she knew she was lying to herself. Because 6 months of watching Luca be a father, watching him transform from a crime lord into a man who chose family over power, watching him prove that love could be more than just a feeling, that was going to be everything. And if he actually managed to pull it off, she was going to have to admit something terrifying. She was going to have to admit that maybe, just maybe, she was falling in love with him all over again. 5 months and 3 weeks into Mara's 6-month deadline, everything fell apart in the span of 12 hours. It started with a phone call at 2 in the morning. Mara jerked awake to the sound of her phone vibrating across the nightstand. She grabbed it without looking at the screen, her heart already racing with the particular panic that came from middle-of-the-night calls. Hello? Mrs. Quinn? An unfamiliar male voice, tense and professional. This is Officer Derek Chen with the Chicago Police Department. I'm calling about Luca Voss. Mara's blood turned to ice. What happened? There's been an incident. Mr. Voss was injured during an altercation at one of his business locations. He's being transported to Northwestern Memorial. He asked us to contact you. How bad? A pause that told her everything she needed to know. You should come to the hospital, ma'am. Mara was out of bed and pulling on clothes before the call ended. She woke Marcus, who'd taken to sleeping in the building's security office at night, and asked him to stay with the boys. I'm coming with you, Marcus said immediately. Someone needs to be here if they wake up. I'll send Richards. He's former Secret Service. The boys will be safe. Marcus was already moving, his phone out, making calls. You're not going alone. They made it to the hospital in 15 minutes. Northwestern's ER was chaos. Saturday night in Chicago meant gunshot wounds, overdoses, domestic violence, and every other flavor of human suffering compressed into fluorescent-lit hallways that smelled like antiseptic and desperation. Marcus bypassed the check-in desk with the kind of authority that suggested he'd done this before, leading Mara directly to a restricted treatment area where police officers stood guard outside a curtained bay. Inside, Luca was conscious but clearly in pain. His shirt had been cut away, revealing a bandage that was already seeping red. His face was bruised, his knuckles were raw, but he was alive. Hey, he said when he saw her, his voice rough. Sorry to wake you. What happened? Mara demanded, her voice sharper than she intended. Attempted coup. Some of my father's old allies decided they wanted their territory back. Staged an ambush at the warehouse where I was meeting with suppliers about the legitimate business transition. How bad are you hurt? Knife wound to the ribs? Looks worse than it is. Couple of bruised ribs? Nothing critical. He tried to sit up and immediately regretted it, his face going pale. A doctor appeared, young and efficient looking. Mr. Voss needs surgery to properly repair the knife wound and ensure there's no internal bleeding. It's not life-threatening if we address it now, but it will be if we wait. Then don't wait, Mara said. I need his consent. Luca looked at Mara, his eyes intense despite the pain. If something goes wrong, if I don't make it through this, there are documents. With my lawyer. Everything goes to you and the boys. The legitimate businesses, the assets, everything. Marcus knows how to access it all. You're not dying, Mara said firmly. You have 6 more days to finish proving yourself, and I will be extremely angry if you cheat your way out of it by getting killed. Despite everything, Luca smiled. Yes, ma'am. I mean it, Luca. You promised to show up every day. You promised to be present. You don't get to break that promise by dying in surgery. I'll do my best. The doctor was preparing to wheel him away when Luca reached out and caught Mara's hand. I love you, he said quietly. I need you to know that, just in case. Tell me again when you wake up. Count on it. They took him away, and Mara stood in the empty treatment bay feeling like the floor had dropped out from under her. Marcus appeared at her elbow. He's going to be fine. Luca's survived worse. Has he? Because this seems pretty bad. 3 years ago, he took a bullet to the shoulder and still drove himself to the hospital. 2 years ago, someone tried to poison him at a business dinner, and he figured it out halfway through the meal. Last year? I get it. He's hard to kill. Exactly. Boss is too stubborn to die, especially now that he has something to live for. They settled into the surgical waiting room, joining the collection of other people waiting for news about their loved ones, wives and mothers and children who all wore the same expression of exhausted fear. Hours crawled by. Marcus made phone calls, his voice low and threatening as he coordinated a response to the attempted coup. Mara caught enough to understand that people were being tracked down, that retribution was being planned, that the message being sent was clear. You don't attack Luca Voss and expect to survive the consequences. It should have disturbed her. Instead, she felt a grim satisfaction. These people had tried to kill the father of her children. They deserved whatever Marcus and his team were planning. When had she become the kind of person who approved of violent retribution? Somewhere between watching Luca show up every single day for 6 months and falling in love with him all over again, apparently. The surgeon finally appeared at 6 a.m., still in scrubs, looking tired but satisfied. Mr. Voss came through surgery well. The knife wound was clean, missed all major organs. We repaired the damage, and he should make a full recovery. He's in recovery now. You can see him in about an hour. Mara felt tension she hadn't realized she was carrying drain out of her body. Thank you. He's lucky, a few inches to the left, and we'd be having a very different conversation. The surgeon left, and Mara found herself sitting down hard in one of the plastic chairs. Marcus crouched in front of her. You okay? No. Yes. I don't know. Mara pressed her hands to her face. I almost lost him. And the worst part is realizing how much that would have destroyed me. I spent 7 years teaching myself not to need him, and now the thought of him not existing in the world makes me feel like I can't breathe. That's love. That's terrifying. Same thing, usually. Mara laughed despite herself. I need to call the boys. They're going to wake up soon and wonder where I am. She stepped into the hallway and called the apartment. Richards answered immediately. They're still asleep, ma'am. Everything's secure here. Can you stay until I get back? I need to see Luca when he wakes up, but then I'll come get them. Of course. Take your time. Mara hung up and leaned against the wall, exhaustion and relief and fear all churning together in her chest. She'd almost lost him. Before she could tell him that the 6-month deadline was unnecessary because she'd already made her decision weeks ago. Before she could admit that watching him transform from a crime lord into a father had been the most beautiful thing she'd ever witnessed. Before she could tell him that, yes, she wanted to try. Wanted to build a family. Wanted to believe that love could work the second time around if both people were willing to fight for it. The universe had almost taken that choice away from her. The realization made her furious and grateful in equal measure. When they finally let her see Luca, he was groggy from anesthesia but awake. The color was better in his face. The monitors showed steady vitals. He smiled when he saw her. Told you I'd make it. You're an idiot, Mara said, her voice breaking. Getting stabbed during a business meeting. What kind of incompetent crime lord are you? The kind who's trying very hard not to be a crime lord anymore. This was the old guard making a last stand. Marcus assures me it's been handled. But handled how? You don't want to know. You're right. I don't. Mara sat in the chair beside his bed and took his hand carefully, avoiding the IV. You scared me. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Be more careful. Because you have 2 sons who need their father and a very irritated almost girlfriend who had a whole speech planned about giving you a real answer to your question, and you nearly ruined it by getting yourself killed. Luca's eyes sharpened despite the drugs. Almost girlfriend? 6 more days was arbitrary anyway. I figured out my answer about 3 months ago. I was just being stubborn about the deadline. And the answer is? Yes. Obviously, yes. I love you. I probably never stopped loving you. I was just too angry and hurt to admit it. But watching you show up every single day, watching you be a father to those boys, watching you choose family over power again and again. Her voice cracked. How could I not fall in love with you all over again? Mara, I'm not finished. Yes, I'll give us a chance. Yes, I want to try to build something real. Yes, I believe you've changed and that you're serious about getting out of the criminal life. But if you ever scare me like this again, if you ever make me stand in a hospital waiting room wondering if you're going to survive surgery, I will personally finish what that knife started. Are we clear? Crystal clear. Good. Now go back to sleep. You need to heal so you can come home. Home, Luca repeated softly. I like the sound of that. The boys are going to want to visit once they wake up. Are you ready for that? Absolutely, though Jace is probably going to lecture me about making better security decisions. He absolutely is. He's been reading books about risk assessment and threat mitigation. I have no idea where he gets this stuff. He's my son. Of course he's reading about security protocols. Mara laughed, feeling the last of the fear drain away. Luca was going to be okay. They were going to be okay. The family they were building, fragile and new and unconventional, was going to survive this. She stayed with him until he fell asleep, then headed home to explain to her sons why their father was in the hospital and why that was both scary and ultimately okay. The conversation went better than expected. Jace absorbed the information with his usual analytical approach, asking questions about the surgery and recovery time and whether this meant Luca would have a cool scar. Nolan cried, but was comforted by the promise that they could visit later. They showed up at the hospital that afternoon bearing drawings and a card that said, "Get well soon, Dad," in Nolan's careful printing and Jace's more sophisticated handwriting. Luca's face when he saw it was worth everything. He was released 3 days later with strict orders to rest and avoid strenuous activity for at least 2 weeks. Mara moved him into the apartment's guest room over his protests. I have a house, he pointed out, with staff and business associates coming and going constantly. You need quiet to heal. The boys want you here. I want you here. So you're staying here. Are you sure? Because I can... Luca, shut up and accept the help. You're always telling me I need to let people support me. Practice what you preach. Yes, ma'am. Those 2 weeks of recovery were a strange, suspended period of domestic normalcy. Luca worked from the apartment, conducting business calls and virtual meetings while carefully managing his transition out of criminal enterprises. The boys helped him change bandages and brought him books, and generally hovered like tiny concerned nurses. Mara watched her family coalesce into something real and solid and beautiful. On the 13th day of his recovery, Luca asked her to go for a walk. Should you be walking? Mara asked. Doctor cleared me for light activity, and I need to show you something. They left the boys with Marcus and drove to an address in Wicker Park that Mara didn't recognize. It was a building, 3 stories, red brick with large windows and a small yard. What is this? Mara asked. Our future, if you want it. Luca unlocked the front door and led her inside. I bought it 6 months ago, right after you gave me the deadline. I've been slowly renovating it. The interior was beautiful. Hardwood floors, updated kitchen, spacious rooms flooded with natural light. The first floor was open-plan living space. The second floor had 4 bedrooms. The third floor had been converted into a home office and library. It's a house, Mara said unnecessarily. It's our house. If you'll have it, separate bedrooms for each of the boys. A master suite for us. Office space for me to run the legitimate businesses. A backyard where Nolan can paint and Jace can read. Space for all of us to actually live instead of just exist. Luca, this is too much. It's exactly enough. I'm not asking you to move in tomorrow. I'm asking you to think about it. To consider making this permanent. Making us permanent. Mara walked through the space, her mind racing. It was perfect. Too perfect. She turned to find Luca watching her with an expression that was equal parts hopeful and terrified. I need you to be honest with me, she said. The criminal enterprises? How far out are you really? 90% transition to legitimate operations. The last 10% is proving difficult because it involves people who don't want to change. But I'm working with federal prosecutors to hand over those remaining operations in exchange for immunity for my cooperation. You're working with the feds? I told you I was serious about getting out. That means cooperation. That means turning state's evidence against the people who won't transition. That means being willing to burn bridges I spent years building. He stepped closer. I want to be someone my sons are proud of, someone you can be proud of. And that means leaving this life completely, even if it makes me a target. It does make you a target. That's why you got stabbed. And it's why I'm working with Marcus to establish legitimate security protocols instead of criminal enforcement. It's why I'm moving assets into legal businesses. It's why I'm trying to build something clean that can't be taken away by a rival's ambition or a prosecutor's case. Mara studied his face, looking for any sign of deception. She found only sincerity and exhaustion and determination. Okay, she said. Okay? Okay, I'll think about the house. Okay, I believe you're serious about leaving the criminal life. Okay, I want to make this permanent. She closed the distance between them. Okay to all of it, on one condition. Anything. We do this right. No shortcuts, no wisdom, no buying your way through problems, no using old connections to smooth over difficulties. We build this family on honesty and effort and showing up every single day, even when it's hard. I can do that. Can you? Because it's going to be hard. The boys are going to have tough days. I'm going to have moments where my trust issues flare up and I push you away. You're going to have times when the easy path is calling in favors from your old life instead of doing things the hard, legitimate way. Can you handle that? Yes. Because the alternative is losing this family, and that's not acceptable. Mara reached up and kissed him, soft and sweet and full of promise. It was their first real kiss in 7 years. It felt like coming home. Move in with us, she said against his lips. Into the apartment for now, then into this house when we're ready. Be a part of our lives completely. No more guest room, no more keeping you at arm's length, just family. Are you sure? No, I'm terrified. But I'm also sure that I love you and that I want to try to build something real. So yes, move in with us. Luca pulled her close, careful of his healing ribs, and held her like she was the most precious thing in the world. I promise I won't waste this chance. You better not, because Jace will absolutely call you out if you do. And that kid is vicious when he feels someone's not living up to their commitments. He gets that from you. Probably. They stood together in the empty house that would someday be filled with their family's life, and Mara let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, happy endings were possible, even for people who'd survived impossible situations. 3 months later, Victor Voss died. The call came early on a Tuesday morning. Luca took it in the kitchen while Mara was making breakfast and the boys were getting ready for school. She watched his expression shift from neutral to something more complicated. Not grief exactly, but not indifference either. When? He asked. A pause. I understand. Yes, I'll make arrangements. He hung up and stood still for a long moment. Your father? Mara asked quietly. Lung cancer. Apparently he'd known for months but didn't tell anyone. Died alone in a VA hospital. Luca's voice was flat, emotionless. The funeral is Friday. Do you want to go? I should. He was my father for all his faults. That's not what I asked. Do you want to go? Luca considered this. No, but I need to. For closure, if nothing else. The funeral was small. Victor had burned most of his bridges in his final years, and the people who might have attended out of fear or obligation had no reason to now that he was gone. A handful of old associates came, more to assess the power vacuum than to pay respects. Luca stood at the graveside with Mara beside him and the boys a few steps back, looking uncomfortable in their formal clothes. The priest said the expected words about eternal rest and returning to dust. Nobody cried. Nobody shared warm memories. It was a perfunctory send-off for a man who'd valued power over people and died having neither. When it was over, Luca stood alone at the grave for a few minutes while Mara took the boys back to the car. What are you thinking? Mara asked when he finally joined them. That I don't want to end up like him, alone, bitter, having sacrificed every meaningful relationship on the altar of control and power. Luca looked at the boys in the back seat. I want to die surrounded by people who love me, who remember me as someone who showed up, who chose family over empire. Then keep choosing that every day, the way you have been. Even when it's hard? Especially then. Luca nodded slowly, then reached over and took her hand. They drove home together, leaving Victor Voss in the past where he belonged. That evening, after the boys were in bed, Luca found Mara in the library of their new house. They'd moved in 2 weeks ago, and she still marveled at having space to breathe. "I need to tell you something," he said. Mara set down her book, her stomach tightening with instinctive worry. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong, but I got the official confirmation today. The federal prosecutors accepted my cooperation agreement. I'm officially out. All criminal enterprises have been transferred or shut down. I'm completely legitimate as of this afternoon." Mara stared at him. "You're serious? It's done?" "It's done. I'm just a boring businessman now. Real estate holdings, import-export companies, a few tech investments, all legal, all clean, all boring." "You did it. You actually did it." "I told you I would." Mara launched herself at him, kissing him with an intensity that made him stumble backward. "Careful," he laughed against her lips. "My ribs are still a little tender." "I don't care. You kept your promise. You got out. You chose us." "Every time. I'll choose this family every time." They stood together in the library of their home, surrounded by books and the quiet sounds of their sleeping children upstairs. And Mara felt something settle in her chest that she hadn't felt in 7 years. Peace, security, home. 6 months later, on a Saturday afternoon in early autumn, Mara found herself in the backyard watching Luca teach the boys how to play soccer. He was terrible at it. Apparently, criminal masterminds didn't typically develop strong athletic skills, but the boys didn't care. They ran and laughed and argued about rules with the kind of easy joy that came from feeling completely safe. Marcus appeared at her elbow, as silent as always. "You look happy," he observed. "I am. It's weird. I keep waiting for something to go wrong." "Maybe stop waiting. Maybe just accept that some things actually work out." "When did you become a philosopher?" "When I watch my boss transform from a ruthless crime lord into a man who volunteers at his kids' school and can't figure out how to work the dishwasher. If that kind of change is possible, anything is." Mara laughed. "Fair point." Nolan scored a goal and did a victory dance that was equal parts adorable and ridiculous. Jace rolled his eyes, but was clearly fighting a smile. Luca scooped Nolan up and spun him around, both of them laughing. "They're good kids," Marcus said. "They are. Despite everything. Because of everything, you raised them right." "We're raising them right," Mara corrected. "Present tense. Together." Marcus nodded and disappeared back into the house to do whatever mysterious security things he did. Luca jogged over, slightly out of breath, his hair messed up and his expression lighter than she'd ever seen it. "Come play with us," he said. "I don't know how to play soccer." "Neither do I. We're all terrible. That's what makes it fun." Mara let him pull her into the game, into the chaos and joy and simple pleasure of being a family on a Saturday afternoon with nothing more pressing than deciding whether the ball had actually crossed the goal line. That night, after the boys were asleep and the house was quiet, Luca found her on their bedroom balcony. "Remember when you asked me to ask again in 6 months?" he said. "That was over a year ago." "I know, but I'm asking now anyway. Marry me." Mara turned to face him. He wasn't on one knee. There wasn't a ring. It was just Luca, standing in the moonlight, asking a question that somehow felt both inevitable and impossibly precious. "That's not very romantic," she said. "I can do romantic if you want. I can hire a flash mob and rent out a restaurant and make a big production. But that's not us. We're the people who survived hell and built something real out of the wreckage. We're the family that chose each other after having every reason not to. We don't need grand gestures. We just need to keep showing up." "You're right. That's not romantic at all. That's just honest." "So is that a yes?" Mara pretended to consider it. "On one condition." "What?" "We get to tell the boys together. They're part of this decision. If they're not on board, we wait." "They're going to be on board. Jace has been dropping hints about wanting to officially share a last name for months. Nolan asked me last week if you were going to be his mom forever, or just until I messed up again." "What did you tell him?" "That you're his mom forever regardless of what I do. That your love for them isn't conditional on your relationship with me. That family doesn't work like that." "Good answer. So is this a yes?" "Yes, obviously yes. I love you. I want to marry you. I want to build this life with you and make it official and legal and permanent. Yes." Luca kissed her with the kind of passion that suggested they might not make it to the actual wedding night before consummating this decision. "We should probably set a date," Mara said when they came up for air. "Next month, City Hall. Just us, and the boys and Marcus as a witness. That's fast. I've waited 7 years. I'm done waiting." "Fair point." They were married on a Tuesday in October at the Chicago City Clerk's office. Jason Nolan served as witnesses alongside Marcus. The ceremony took 7 minutes. The celebration afterward involved pizza and ice cream, and the boys arguing about whether they should hyphenate their last name or just take Voss outright. It was perfect. That evening, after the boys were finally asleep, wired on sugar and excitement, Luca and Mara sat together on the couch in their living room. "We did it," Mara said. "We did. We built a family out of absolutely nothing. Out of poverty and abandonment and manipulation and 7 years of separation. We took all of that and turned it into this. You did most of the heavy lifting. I just showed up after you'd already done the impossible part. You showed up every day after that. That's not nothing. No, it's not. But it's also the bare minimum of what a father and husband should do. Most people don't even manage the bare minimum. You exceeded it." Luca pulled her closer. "I love you. I love our boys. I love this life we've built. And I promise you, Mara, I'm going to keep showing up, keep being present, keep choosing this family over everything else. For the rest of my life. I'm going to hold you to that." "Good. Hold me accountable. Keep me honest. Remind me what matters when I forget." "Deal." They sat together in the quiet house, listening to the familiar sounds of their children breathing in their rooms upstairs, and Mara marveled at how far they'd come. From a rusted scrap cart in the snow to a warm house filled with love. From survival to actually living. From separate and broken to together and whole. A year later, Mara stood in the alley behind their old trailer park. The scrap cart she'd dragged through countless Chicago winters sat abandoned against a dumpster, rusted, forgotten, no longer needed. She'd come back one last time to collect the few remaining items she'd left in storage. The trailer park looked even worse than she remembered, and she was struck by how much her life had changed in such a short time. Luca appeared beside her, the boys in the car waiting. "You okay?" he asked. "Yeah, just saying goodbye to the old life." "Any regrets?" Mara looked at the cart, symbol of everything she'd survived, everything she'd endured, everything she'd overcome. "No regrets. That cart got me through the worst years of my life, but I don't need it anymore." "What do you need?" She turned to face him. This man who'd abandoned her and then fought his way back, who'd proven that people could change if they wanted it badly enough, who showed up every single day to be a father and husband and partner. "Just this. You. The boys. Our family. That's all I need." "That's all I need too." They walked back to the car together, leaving the past in the alley where it belonged. Jace looked up from his book when they got in. "Can we stop for ice cream on the way home?" "It's November. It's freezing," Mara pointed out. "Ice cream is good year-round," Nolan argued. "That's actually scientifically accurate," Jace added. "Frozen desserts don't have a seasonal limitation." Luca laughed. "Ice cream it is, because when your kids use scientific arguments to justify dessert, you have to respect the effort." They drove toward home, their real home, the one filled with warmth and books and love, and Mara felt gratitude wash over her in waves. She'd survived poverty and abandonment and 7 years of impossible circumstances. She'd raised 2 brilliant, kind, resilient boys who were going to change the world someday. She'd found her way back to love with a man who'd proven himself worthy of a second chance. She'd built a family from wreckage and made it beautiful. The scrap cart was behind her. The future stretched ahead, full of possibility and promise, and the simple, extraordinary gift of being together. And that was more than enough. That was everything.